The Nigel Farage movement, if you will, is the ability to push the Conservatives and push a parliamentary agenda without winning seats.
We have to leave it as the Nigel Farage movement hits the buffers. Thank you both very much for coming at this ungodly hour of the morning.
Indeed.
Back to Hugh.
Andrew, thanks very much. Time is 6 o'clock and a very good morning to you. We've been on air for just about 8 hours, but we are fresh and fizzing with energy to bring you this morning's news, which is that Boris Johnson has won this general election for the Conservatives and is heading for a majority of 78. A very big majority indeed, and the biggest since Margaret Thatcher's majority in 1987, the third victory that she scored. So this is where we are right now. Let's take a look at the seat numbers on Broadcasting House in central London. And here we have the projected end result, which will be the Conservatives on 365 under Boris Johnson. That's a hefty gain for him from 2017. Labour on 203 with some significant losses from 2017. The SNP performing strongly in Scotland on 48. The Lib Dems on 11, a relatively poor performance by them and losing their leader, Joe Swinson. Plaid Cymru projected to end the night on 4. And there we have the pattern of scores for you on Broadcasting House. So a very good morning to you, and you are watching Election 2019. And here at New Broadcasting House in central London, we're going to have this morning's headlines, and we'll say a very good morning to Louise Minchin.
Thank you very much, Hugh. Very good morning to you. The Conservatives have won the general election with their biggest majority since 1987. Labour, meanwhile, has had its worst performance in 3 decades. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn said he was disappointed and wouldn't lead his party into any future general election. It was a poor night, too, for the Liberal Democrats, whose leader, Jo Swinson, lost her seat. Jessica Parker's report contains flash photography.
He knows it. The Conservatives have won a working majority in an election Boris Johnson described as historic.
That gives us now, in this new government, the chance to respect the democratic will of the British people, to change this country for the better, and to unleash the potential of the entire people of this country.
They're delighted, the Tories making those inroads into Labour heartlands that voted leave.
I would like to thank Boris, because I would say that I'm going to be on that train on Monday. I'm going to London. We're going to get Brexit done.
His party on course for a major defeat. Jeremy Corbyn acknowledged a disappointing result.
I want to also make it clear that I will not lead the party in any future general election campaign. I will discuss with our party to ensure there is a process now of reflection on this result.
Glum faces here, Grimsby, Scunthorpe, Sedgefield, Stoke, Don Valley among Labour's losses.
There was 2 fronts I was fighting on. One front was the fact that so many of my voters could not and did not want to support Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister. But the second front was the Labour Party's position on Brexit, that we'd moved to a position of being more like a Stop Brexit, Remain party.
And a huge blow for the Lib Dems, their leader Jo Swinson narrowly losing her seat.
For millions of people in our country, these results will bring dread and dismay, and people are looking for hope.
Arriving at Conservative headquarters, they might be in the party mood. Boris Johnson wanted to drive his agenda through. The door is now open. Jessica Parker, BBC News.
Well, as we saw, the SNP took Jo Swinson's seat. They've won 48 out of 59 constituencies in Scotland, with all but one result declared. Nicola Sturgeon's party backed a second referendum on EU membership during their campaign. The SNP also ran on securing a new vote on Scottish independence from the UK, something which they will push for in the coming Parliament.
I don't pretend that every single person that voted SNP yesterday will necessarily support independence, but there has been a strong endorsement in this election of Scotland having a choice over our future, of not having to put up with a Conservative government that we didn't vote for and not having to accept life as a nation outside the European Union. So that independence referendum that was very much at the heart of the SNP's campaign, there is a renewed, refreshed, strengthened mandate for that.
It's been a bad night for the Democratic Unionist Party in Northern Ireland. Deputy Leader Nigel Dodds lost his Belfast North seat to Sinn Féin's John Finucane. It also lost Belfast South to the nationalist SDLP. The Alliance Party has won a seat at Westminster, taking North down, and the SDLP took the seat of Foyle from Sinn Féin. All 40 seats in Wales have now been declared, and the Conservatives have made significant gains. They took 6 seats from Labour, including Bridgend in the south and 4 in the north east: Wrexham, Dillon, the Vale of Clwyd and Clwyd South. Plaid Cymru held onto all 4 of their seats. The only good news for the Green Party came from Brighton. The party's sole sitting MP and its former leader, Caroline Lucas, comfortably held onto her Brighton Pavilion seat. She's held that position ever since becoming the country's first Green MP in the 2010 election. You might have seen a little bit earlier that Boris Johnson took his dog with him to the polling station. Here is Dylan being cuddled by Mr Johnson's partner, Carrie Symonds, just before the declaration in Uxbridge. And it looks like he is dealing with all the attention pretty well. There is, of course, lots more from BBC News online, also on your mobile, where you can look up the results in your constituency. Use our interactive map to search for any seat across the UK on our website or the BBC News app. We'll be back with Hugh in a few moments. First, though, let's catch up with the weather. Here's Matt Taylor. Morning.
Thanks, Louise. Well, it's a story of sunshine and showers across many parts of the country. Some of you wetter than others. We certainly start that way across eastern Scotland. Persistent rain here, and anywhere really from Northern Ireland through parts of North Wales, North West England, the Midlands towards the southeast. We've got rain at the moment. There'll be rain on and off through the day. A few brighter spells developing between that. A little bit of sunshine either side, but a windy day across the south. And temperatures staying on the cool side, even with some sunshine in the north. And the strong winds will remain for all as we head into the weekend. That's the latest weather. Back to election 2019.
A very good morning. It's 7 minutes past 6 and we are in a position to tell you that the Conservatives have won this general election and won it handsomely for them, with a majority probably in the region of 78 or 80 seats. It's a remarkable victory for Boris Johnson and the Conservatives. This is where we are right now. There are 8 results still to come, but Boris Johnson and the Conservatives on 358 seats, way past the 326 finishing line, and then the Labour Party on 203, way behind. It's the worst result for the Labour Party. It goes way back beyond even Michael Foot's poor result back in 1983. So a dreadful result for them, by their own admission. So with me in the studio, I've been joined by Andrew Marr and by Vicky Young, our chief political correspondent, and we'll take stock on where we are right now. And Andrew, you were in Uxbridge earlier. You saw the Prime Minister there. Your sense of where we are, just broadly now today. Politics has changed. Everyone is saying that. Why don't you underline for us to what extent it's changed?
Well, this is a really big turning point for the country last night, I think. We have a period again of a single dominant leader in Westminster. We haven't had that for a very, very long time, going back to the coalition before that. And we have, quite significantly, a very dominant leader in Scotland as well. Trouble ahead there. But Boris Johnson can now get us out of the EU on his deadline of the end of January, on his terms. He has a very, very difficult year and possibly more of negotiation for all the terms of trade. But nonetheless, we are leaving the EU. That's a big moment. And the Labour agenda of a return to tax and spend, more nationalisation and a kind of more generous, radical social programme, all of that is now for a parallel universe. It may never happen.
Lots of talk about what kind of Prime Minister Boris Johnson will now become. Do you expect this to change? Do you expect him to be distancing himself from some elements of the party that he was having to be nice to before?
Well, it's really interesting, this. I know lots of Conservative MPs and ministers who've been looking at him for a long time, trying to work out who is the real Boris Johnson. And there's a group of people who think that the real Boris Johnson is going to tack now to the centre, because he's got the majority he's always wanted, and his instincts will be, as in London, for healing and bringing people together. And you don't do that by privatising the NHS. You do that by more public spending, and perhaps even by doing a slightly softer Brexit than many of his hardline ERG Brexiteers would hope for. Against that, there are those who say, no, no, he's become a tougher person. This is not a man who forgives easily, if I can put it that way. And there are the two Boris Johnsons jostling in number 10. It's going to become fairly clear quite soon, I think, as Laura was saying earlier, which one is going to emerge. But I thought even his short speech at the Declaration in Uxbridge, where he, in a sense, rebranded the Conservative Party, just as Tony Blair turned Labour into New Labour, he now talks not of the Conservative Party, but of the One Nation Conservative Party and this new government. And I think that's a very interesting indication of where he's going.
Well, these were the images earlier, Andrew, and you were there. This is when he arrived at the Count in Uxbridge, knowing already that he was going to be returned to power, but this time with a proper majority and something he can do something with. And I'll bring Vicky Young in as well at this point, before we join Reeta for some of the big results of the night. We'll bring you up to date with all the big results of the night. But welcome, Vicky. It's good to have you with us. And I'm just wondering, from your point of view, we've discussed some of the Conservative issues there with Andrew and what kind of Prime Minister Boris Johnson becomes. What about Labour? And what about their search for a new leader? Jeremy Corbyn suggesting that he'd like to hang around for a bit to oversee this process of reflection and mapping a future for the party. Is that credible?
Well, there's lots in the party who will not want him to do that. I mean, when you look at some of these results, I think the one in Bassett Law is the one that stood out for lots of people. This is not just the Conservatives taking those seats, it's winning them by a mile. And that is the difference. And the question now is, does the Conservative Party change? It's now going to be representing areas of the country. In some cases, it's never represented. But also, what does that do to Labour? How do they reconnect? And what is to blame? We've heard all throughout the evening people in the Labour shadow cabinet saying it was all about Brexit. Of course, a lot of this was about Brexit. Places I went to in South Yorkshire, for example, they were voting for Boris, and they did say for Boris, not for the Conservatives, because they wanted Brexit done. Will they stick with the Conservatives or not? Who knows whether they will. But, you know, Labour has now going to have a fight over the soul of that party. Was it Mr Corbyn? So many candidates who said to me on the doorstep, it was coming up completely unprompted about Jeremy Corbyn and how people felt they just couldn't vote for him, people who'd voted Labour all their lives. So it was a mixture of those two. I think it allowed some Labour people to say, I'm going to vote for the Conservatives, I want to get Brexit done. There's no doubt that the agenda, though, wasn't chiming.
Agree with every word of that. If I could just say, I had a word with John McDonnell earlier on, whose count was also in Uxbridge, and I got the strong impression from him that later on today there will be a joint announcement by John McDonnell and Jeremy Corbyn. I think that they were both going to go, not necessarily immediately. They don't want a sense of panic and the party falling apart in the wake of this defeat, but I think they're going to go, and go quite quickly, and go together.
Interesting. Let's pause for a second, because if you're just joining us here at the BBC Election Centre, it is 6:13 in the morning. The Conservatives have won the general election with a hefty majority of 80 seats. That is our current calculation. Just 8 results to come in. And if you've not been watching overnight and you've had a nice kip, well, let me tell you, you've missed quite a few dramatic and earth-shattering results, really, if it comes to Labour territory, former traditional, rich, strong Labour territory switching into Conservative hands. That's been the story of the night. And Reeta is with us to take us through some of those Conservative gains and to let us know, really, where some of the most spectacular changes happened. Reeta?
Spectacular is the word, Hugh. And at this stage in the morning, actually, there are too many names to fit onto the touchscreen, but we've selected some of the most startling for you. Names like Sedgefield, Tony Blair's old seat, which he once held with a majority of 25,000. That is now Conservative. Great Grimsby, which has been Labour since the war, that is now Conservative. Bassett Law, now this has some of the most startling figures in it, so I want to go into some of the detail. So the new Conservative MP for Bassett Law is Brendan Clark-Smith. He took 55% of the share of the vote. But what's so extraordinary is this: Labour's vote absolutely plummeting through the floor. They lost 25% of share of the vote compared to 2017. And if I show you the swing from Labour to Conservative, look at that, an 18% swing. I think that is probably the biggest swing that we've seen during the night. Just go back to that list then. Lee also going Conservative. This was in elections past Andy Burnham's old seat. There's a swing there from Labour to Conservative of 13%, and Blythe Valley, a swing from Labour to Conservative of 10%. Going further south, Peterborough, that's gone Conservative as well. And in London, two seats that the Conservatives have narrowly won: Kensington from Labour and Carshalton from the Liberal Democrats. And what all these seats have in common is that apart from Kensington, they are all Brexit voting seats. And that tells you, Hugh, everything that you need to know.
Indeed it does, Reeta. Thank you very much. And Reeta, they're taking us through some of those spectacular gains. President Trump has been saying some things about this election result. Let's take a look at this. He's been very busy on Twitter, saying earlier on that this was a big win for Boris. And now he says this: congratulations to Boris Johnson on his great win, capital letters. Britain and the United States will now be free to strike a massive new trade deal after Brexit. And this deal has the potential to be far bigger and more lucrative than any deal that could be made with the EU. Celebrate Boris. Well, a characteristically understated bit of social media there from the President, but certainly offering his congratulations and saying that anything's possible. We have 8 results to go, 642 in. I want to go down to Cambrai in Cornwall. Martin Oates is there for us, our political editor in the southwest of England. Martin, we have a delay in one of them. Tell us about that.
We do, and in fact the St Ives result, this is the St Ives constituency count that's left here. It's traditionally always late, often in the afternoon. The idea this time was they get around that by, instead of bringing the ballot boxes from the Isles of Scilly here, to count in the islands. However, the ballot boxes still need to be shifted from the off islands to the principal island, St Mary's, and the weather has proved a big obstacle to that. I can hear the storms battering this leisure centre. Now, the idea was, the hope was, that they could actually get a Royal Naval aircraft from RAS Culdrose out into the Atlantic to the Scillies to move those boxes to St Mary's, but we've just been told that won't be possible. So it looks as if, despite the best plans, we will be back to a traditional late afternoon result here for St Ives.
What about the region itself, Martin? Just wondering what you can tell us about the contest there overnight, given the traditional Lib Dem Conservative battlegrounds there. What's happened there?
Well, I mean, St Ives really is the last hope for the Lib Dems. It is the most marginal seat as of the last election. The Lib Dems failed to take it by just 312 votes last time. The MP, long-standing Lib Dem MP who lost the seat in 2015, stood in subsequent elections. Now he's got, I think, a significant personal following, but if we look at what's happened across the rest of the region, other seats, traditional Lib Dem strongholds formerly like North Devon, North Cornwall, which were marginal seats coming into this election, we've seen the Tories there increase their majorities massively. So it's looking pretty grim, really, for the Lib Dems across the region. Very good for the Tories. The two Labour MPs in the region have held on to their seats, but otherwise it's very much a big night for the Tories here. And the Lib Dems will be hoping that St Ives will buck the trend. However, as I said, it's always the last seat to count, so they were hoping that in 2015 as well.
And just as a final point, Martin, can you shed some light on the debate we've been having in the studio as to the Corbyn effect, the Brexit effect? Can you separate those for us and tell us what people are saying there about those effects on the doorstep?
Well, I mean, some very interesting accounts, really, from both Labour and the Conservatives in this neck of the woods. There was a count here for George Eustace's seat, the Campbell and Redruth seat. I was told by both Labour and the Conservatives that the sort of topsy-turvy nature of this election was borne out here. So in the urban areas, the poorer areas, the big extremes of wealth and poverty here, areas which traditionally supported Labour, the Conservatives are getting a warm welcome, and in some of the much more affluent middle-class areas, on this occasion, but the Conservatives, would previously have counted on their support. Labour was getting the warm welcome. So I think it's very much a microcosm of the result in the country as a whole, and in the same way as nationally, it's very much in the Conservatives' favour.
Martin, good to talk to you again. Thank you very much. Martin Oates there for us in Cambrai. Vicky, a quick word on that.
Yeah, I mean, I went to Cornwall during the election and in the southwest as well, and what's happened there, which we've seen elsewhere as well, the Remain vote splitting. People I spoke to down there were unsure who to vote for in order to register an anti-Brexit vote, because Labour had actually done quite well before. And this is the problem for the Lib Dems. They were coming from such a low base. They did so badly in 2015 and 2017. In a lot of places, they were trying to come from third place, and it just hasn't proved possible in almost all of those places.
So, we're talking there about the south-west of England, and earlier on we were talking about the very different picture in Scotland, where the SNP have had a strong night and they've gained 13 seats. If we look at the state of the parties in Scotland, the SNP on 48, the Conservatives on 6, they've dropped 7 seats in Scotland. The Lib Dems on 4 and the Labour Party on 1, having lost 6. But of course, Jo Swinson lost her seat in East and Bartonshire. So that's the state of the parties in Scotland. Let's stay with that Scottish theme and join Andrew.
Thanks, Hugh. Let's go straight to Glasgow. Former leader of the Scottish Labour Party, Kezia Dugdale, is joining us. It's sort of back to the future for you, isn't it? You had 1 MP in 2015 and you're back to 1 MP tonight. It almost seems like there is no future for Scottish Labour.
Well, it certainly doesn't look very bright this morning. In 2017, we had 27% share of the vote in 7 seats. We added 6 onto that very dismal result from 2015. All of that progress has now gone backwards. It looks like we're on about 19% of the vote on just 1 MP. That 1 MP being Ian Murray, who stands out as being very pro-UK and very pro-EU, which is something that Labour wasn't able to offer most of the electorate in Scotland.
Where does it leave the Union tonight when we've had Scotland and England vote in such different ways? A party in Scotland sweeping the board that wants a second independence referendum, and a government now in London with a large majority that has said, you're not going to get it.
Look, there's no doubting the fact that the SNP have had a sensational night tonight, far better than I think they expected. They were hoping for the low 40s and they're touching at nearly 50 seats tonight. What does that mean in terms of Scotland's constitutional future? Well, I think most Scots will wake up and see that the demand for a second independence referendum will never have been higher. But the likelihood of that second referendum happening is much reduced because Boris Johnson, comfortable majority that he has now, has no real reason to agree to a second independence referendum. And I think it's very interesting that the first words out of Nicola Sturgeon's mouth from the Glasgow count was basically to say to Boris Johnson, I'll respect your mandate, and that means Brexit is now a done deal, if you'll respect mine and give me the second independence referendum. Boris Johnson's going to need to have a very quick answer to that.
Is it dangerous for the Union now to be in this position to, if the London, we know power resides with London when it comes to a referendum, that's the Westminster Parliament. But is it dangerous, given the SNP is so rampant, to deny them that second referendum? I mean, it could be that the arguments for independence now are actually tougher than they were in 2014.
I think that's probably right, if you accept that the last independence referendum was lost on fundamental questions about the economy and the currency in particular. They still remain unresolved. And, you know, when people are living off of caffeine just now and are sleep deprived, and it can feel quite threatening.
Stop speaking about me.
in the cold light of day, I think the dominance of constitutional politics really suits both the SNP and the Conservatives. Nicola Sturgeon will advance her argument for a Section 30 order. Boris Johnson will say no to it, and each will be serving their own core vote, their own base, and on it goes.
OK. Kezia Duckdale, thank you for that. I know it's been a long night.
Thank you.
Hugh?
Well, it's been a long night, Andrew. Certainly been a long night, but you're still looking pretty fresh on it, to be fair.
It's the drugs, they've clicked in.
Given all the elections that you've covered in various capacities over the years, let's have your readout of where we are at the end of this night.
I think this election is incredibly significant because what we're witnessing, what we've witnessed, is basically the passing of power from one establishment to another. The centre-left and centre-right, which have dominated this country for decades, John Major, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, Michael Heseltine, and all the other politicians associated with them, it's over. They're gone now. Brexit is happening. And the Conservative Party that now has this majority is very different from the previous Conservative Party. It is less metropolitan, it's less southern, it's less bourgeois. It is now more working class, more northern, more provincial, more small towns and cities. And on the Labour side, so that's a new establishment coming in there. And you hear all sorts of different accents and non-traditional Conservative accents. Labour may have lost Mr Corbyn now, but Corbynism still thinks it has a grip on that party. That's a different establishment as well. So we move into a new power structure in this country. And as I look at elections, until tonight, there have been two transformative elections in modern times. One was 1945, the Attlee government. The other was 1979, the arrival of Margaret Thatcher. We can now add a third to it, which is the election of 2019.
It's been great to have you with us, Andrew. And we'll see you later on. Thank you very much. Andrew Neil has been with us throughout the night. Andrew, the other Andrew,
yes.
On the Scottish theme, and we were discussing the Kezia Dugdale, what did that say to you?
Well, I think it's really, really interesting. I agree with Kezia Dugdale to the extent that the demand for an independence referendum, again, is now very, very high. But the problems are also new. Because if you think it through, by the time the SNP get to that second referendum, we will almost certainly have left the EU. Yeah. And so Scottish voters are being asked for what you might call the double out of the European market and out of the British market at the same time. And that's quite a big ask, particularly when you realise that getting back into the EU later on is very difficult for currency reasons, border reasons and reasons of the Scottish economy. So there's a lot of problems ahead for the SNP, even if I don't mention the politically difficult trial coming up of Alex Salmond early in the new year. So I think Nicola Sturgeon is in a slightly weaker position than she appears to be. But as I say, she is as dominant, at least as dominant, possibly more dominant in Scottish politics as Boris Johnson is south of the border. And she had a very, very clear strategy for what to do if there was a hung parliament and she was dealing with Jeremy Corbyn. She knew exactly what to ask Jeremy Corbyn and thought she'd get it. Boris Johnson, it's much, much harder. She doesn't really have a lot of leverage now. And he is determined to stop that referendum. So what does she do? Does she go for illegal referendum or a referendum without the oversight of Westminster? Her own electorate, the SNP, are basically a pretty law-abiding, middle-of-the-road party. And I think she couldn't do that. I think it would be very, very hard for her. She said she won't do it, and I think she couldn't. So I don't quite see what her options are if Boris Johnson simply says no.
Fascinating. Andrew, we'll talk to you again in a while. Thank you very much. So, the map is changing, and the map has changed overnight. Let's join Sophie once again outside.
Yeah. Well, we're still waiting for some of the results to come in, just a few black hexagons that need filling in. But the really extraordinary thing about this map and how it has changed is the difference between the south and the southeast of England. I'm walking around the capital now. This is the 73 London MPs, and really hasn't changed that much. Some seats like Kensington, which have gone to the Tories, Richmond Park, which have gone Lib Dem, but it is when you come up past Wales and into the northeast of Wales, for example, all these seats that I'm walking along right now have all gone blue. They were Labour strongholds Last night, they turned, some of them for the very first time. And then the Labour red wall that we were talking about at the start of the night. Well, there is still a wall there. There is still a line straight across England, but it is much thinner than it was before. And we also now have a Conservative wall as well. I can literally walk across the whole of the northwest and the northeast of England, and all these seats that are coming down the coast, they have all gone blue. And Scotland as well, like it did in 2015, it has mostly gone yellow. A big night as well in Northern Ireland. I've got two voters with me here. This was two-tone, Sinn Féin, DUP, when we started the night. It is now a very different picture. Sinn Féin, a very good evening for Sinn Féin, particularly in North Belfast.
They did. They managed to take out the head of the DUP in the House of Parliament in North Belfast. John Finucane took that seat. Bit of a crush for the DUP there. Across the board, they've held up. They've held all their seats. They've lost one in Derry.
Was it a Brexit vote?
Certainly was. It was Brexit pushed us all over the line.
And what about the DUP? You're a DUP voter.
A very poor night. 3 unionist seats now lost. It's a case of now unionists in the minority. So it's a poor night for unionism.
OK, how much difference will it make to politics in Northern Ireland?
I think it'll be significant. There'll be a lot of heads and chins down this morning after what's taken place.
OK, thank you both very much for joining me. And let's go also to our SNP voter in Scotland, because this, as I said, was very like 2015, almost all yellow.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty impressive result for the SNP. It just shows exactly what Scotland wants, which is effectively to keep the Tories out.
But with all the blue down there?
I mean, but there's a lot of stuff that's devolved. I mean, personally, for me, the important things that the SNP can do for me, even with a Tory majority in government, is keep education, keep healthcare, keep everything as accessible as they've been doing under a Tory majority in the first place anyway. So I think that will be strengthened by this.
OK, well, thank you very much for talking to us. So as you can see, a really good idea now with our map of hexagons. You can see now where the power balance really lies.
Indeed, Sophie. Thanks very much again. Sophie there with the guests on the piazza outside Broadcasting House. The time is 6:30. There are 7 results to come in this general election of 2019. There are 643 in. And if we look at our projection on the Palace of Westminster, these are the actual scores, the actual numbers of seats as things stand. We have Boris Johnson on 359. 326 was the winning line, but he's on 359. And Labour way back on 203. As I say, there are just 7 seats to come, and we are projecting a Conservative majority of 80 seats. 80 seats in this new House of Commons. You're watching Election 2019.
Hello, this is BBC News. The Conservatives have won the general election with their biggest majority since 1987. Labour, meanwhile, has had its worst performance in 3 decades. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn said he wouldn't lead his party into any future general election. It was a poor night too for the Liberal Democrats, whose leader Jo Swinson lost her seat. Jessica Parker's report contains flash photography.
He knows it. The Conservatives have won a majority in an election Boris Johnson described as historic.
That gives us now, in this new government, the chance to respect the democratic will of the British people, to change this country for the better, and to unleash the potential of the entire people of this country.
They're delighted, the Tories making those inroads into Labour heartlands that voted leave.
I would like to thank Boris, because I would say that I'm going to be on that train on Monday. I'm going to London. We're going to get Brexit done.
His party on course for a major defeat. Jeremy Corbyn acknowledged a disappointing result.
I want to also make it clear that I will not lead the party in any future general election campaign. I will discuss with our party to ensure there is a process now of reflection on this result.
Glum faces here: Bolsover, Grimsby, Sedgefield, Darlington and Don Valley among Labour's losses.
There was two fronts I was fighting on. One front was the fact that so many of my voters could not and did not want to support Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister. But the second front was the Labour Party's position on Brexit, that we'd moved to a position of being more like a Stop Brexit, Remain party.
Have you lost your seat, Miss Swinson?
And a huge blow for the Lib Dems, their leader Jo Swinson narrowly losing her seat.
For millions of people in our country, these results will bring dread and dismay, and people are looking for hope.
Arriving at Conservative headquarters, they might be in the party mood. Boris Johnson wanted to drive his agenda through. The door is now open. Jessica Parker, BBC News.
Police and the military in New Zealand have airlifted 6 bodies from White Island in the Bay of Plenty, where a volcano erupted on Monday, killing 16 people. Rich Preston reports.
Recovery teams set off from nearby Whakatane airbase in the small hours of Friday morning to search for those still left on the island. It was a high-risk operation, with scientists warning of a more than 50% chance of another eruption.
The environment that those staff encountered was unpredictable, challenging, and those staff showed absolute courage in order to ensure that those 6 people were returned to their loved ones.
In the end, 6 bodies were recovered and taken to the New Zealand naval ship the HMS Wellington. Divers and aerial search teams were sent back to look for 2 more people who remain missing. Dozens of tourists were on the private island when the volcano erupted, sending a thick plume of smoke and ash into the air. As the operation to recover those remaining bodies took place, a blessing was held out at sea to remember the 16 who lost their lives. Rich Preston, BBC News.
In other news today, the US House Judiciary Committee has adjourned a marathon hearing in Washington without voting on 2 articles of impeachment against President Trump. The acrimonious meeting of the committee ran late into the night. Chairman Jerry Nadler said that members should search their consciences before the committee meets again on Friday. President Trump has reportedly approved a trade deal in principle with China. Under the agreement, the US would suspend tariffs on $160 billion of Chinese goods. In return, China promises to buy more agricultural products from the US. Lots more, of course, on the election on the BBC News Online, on your mobile as where you can look up the results in your constituency. Back now to election 2019.
Very good morning. It's 6:36 and welcome to the BBC Election Centre, where after a very long night of dramatic results, the political landscape has changed significantly and there is a Conservative government returning to power, but this time with a majority, we think, of 80 seats. There are just 5 results to come in and there have been big changes overnight. Big performance by the SNP in Scotland, where they've made some significant gains. But the biggest gains of all, of course, by the Conservatives, notably in lots of those areas held by Labour for so many years. Quite a few of them in Wales, certainly in North East Wales. So let's take a look at those now and see what's been going on overnight. And Reeta is in our results centre, and Reeta will tell us a little more about the state of the parties in Wales and what's happened.
All the results are now in from Wales, all 40 of the seats declared, and Labour has come top of the table, as it's done in the past 26 elections. Since the First World War, Labour has always got the highest number of seats and the highest vote share, and you'll see from this table that exactly the same thing has happened tonight. But within that big framework, there's been a lot of change, and let me show you some of those seats that have in fact changed hands. Let's try and get this back again. There we go. That's what I was after. Seats like Wrexham in North Wales. Now, that has been Labour for a long time, since 1935, except for one brief period. There was a majority, a Labour majority of just under 2,000. That's gone Conservative. Clwyd South. Now, Boris Johnson, interestingly, contested this seat in 1997. He lost by about 14,000 votes. Well, now this seat has gone Conservative, and the Conservatives have a majority of 1,200. Bridgend in South Wales, that's also gone Conservative. Ynys Môn, that's very interesting. Anglesey, that was a seat that Plaid Cymru had really fancied their chances in, but in fact, overnight, what happened was that the Conservatives took that too, and the Vale of Clwyd and Delyn too have both gone Conservative. So this is part of the picture of what has contributed to this big, sizable Conservative majority tonight. The Conservatives making real gains in what have been traditional Labour heartlands.
Reeta, thank you very much for taking us through some of those remarkable results there in the Welsh political landscape. Let's go straight to Cardiff, and my colleague Sian Lloyd is there and has been keeping an eye on the events across Wales in the National Counting Centre. Good morning, Sian, bore da, and I'm just wondering, take us through, if you would, the changes as you see them. Reeta gave us some examples there, but how do you measure these changes that have taken place overnight? What would you pick out for us?
Well, bore da, Hugh, and here in City Hall, as you can see, we are virtually the last people standing because, yes, all the counts have finished here and we have all the results. Well, as Reeta was saying, those north-east seats are very symbolic. We were talking about them, weren't we, really just before midnight when we were discussing the exit poll. Now, some of those seats have been Conservative in the past, the Vale of Clwyd, and so Wrexham obviously does stand out because that has never had a Conservative MP. Reeta also mentioned Ynys Môn, and it's probably worth pointing out that Ynys Môn really has been a three-way marginal for quite some time, and actually it was held by the Conservatives back in the 1980s, you'll remember, by Keith Best. So only now we have Alyn and Deeside. That is the only Labour seat in North Wales, whereas previously there had been that cluster. But again, it is a leave voting area there, and those seats were marginal, some of them on very tight margins. We spoke about Gower earlier as well, and Labour did manage to hold on to Gower, and they're absolutely delighted about that. Great disappointment here from Welsh Labour, and questions are being asked. Did they make their campaign distinctive enough from the UK campaign? Jeremy Corbyn was campaigning here, but the First Minister, Mark Drakeford, said that he also bore some of the responsibility. I spoke to Paul Davis, who's the leader of the Welsh Conservatives. They are absolutely delighted this evening. They put some of their success down to the Boris effect, they said, but also they were being told on the doorstep that people didn't really understand what Labour was saying about Brexit, that their message simply wasn't clear enough. They say their challenge now for the Conservatives is to hold on to those voters in future elections. And of course, the next election that we have here in Wales is in 2021, which is the Welsh Assembly elections. So will this result translate into more gains for the Conservatives then? Well, of course, we'll have to wait and see.
Indeed, Sian. Thanks very much, and good to talk to you. Sian Lloyd there for us in Cardiff with some thoughts on the changing picture in Wales overnight. It's just gone 20 to 7 in the morning. Why don't I have a quick word with Ben Wright, my colleague there, who's outside Conservative Party headquarters in London. And Ben, are we expecting some appearance by the Prime Minister or something happening shortly?
We are, Hugh. He's currently in there, which is the Tory Party HQ. He's been in there for about an hour or so. And he arrived here to cheers, of course, from Tory Party staffers. He addressed them in the room just over there to my left and told them that there had been a political earthquake, that the party had won a stonking majority. They chanted his name. He said that he would be governing as a one-nation Tory Prime Minister and stressed that while, of course, the priority was to get Brexit done, that they would now be addressing all the other issues that the people, new voters who've never voted Tory before, have demanded during the course of this election. He's still in there. He's watching the results come in, I'm being told, and he'll probably leave here in the next 20 minutes, half an hour or so, and go somewhere else.
OK, Ben, thanks very much. We'll catch up in a while. Ben Wright there for us at Conservative HQ. It's 6:43. If you're just joining us, there are just a few results to go, 5 results to go in this election, and we've got 645 in, so we're almost done in terms of results, and we are looking at a Conservative majority of 80. The Lib Dem leader, Jo Swinson, who lost her seat in East Dunbartonshire, as I understand it, Vicky, is no longer leader of the party either.
Yeah, that's right. She has resigned. It was inevitable. If you're not in the House of Commons, you can't be leader of the Liberal Democrats. Ed Davey, who she beat for the leadership contest, he and Sal Brinton, the president of the party, will be joint leaders while they have a leadership election. But of course, who's left standing at the moment? They are actually one down on their disastrous result last time round. So unless they win St Ives and Andrew George manages to win that, they will be going backwards because Cheltenham has come in as a Conservative hold, which was their other remaining hope. So incredibly disappointing night for the Liberal Democrats. You know, at the beginning of this, of course, they thought this was a one-off chance for them to break through because of Brexit, and it just hasn't happened for them.
Ironically, I think if we look at the percentage share of the vote, Vicky, their vote is actually going up 4%. But it's the way the system works, isn't it?
Yeah, they have moved into second place. I mean, if there's any, I mean, when I say silver lining here, we're talking quite a small one here. Yes, but you know, they lost their deposits all over the country last time round. They had gone to third place in lots of places where they should have been challenging. That made it incredibly difficult for them. So they have moved into second place in lots of places. If you're looking into the long term. But, you know, who's going to lead them? There's, you know, it's a very small field.
I'd say 2 things to what Vicky's saying. First of all, I think we should acknowledge that Jo Swinson made a very, very graceful and rather brave resignation speech when it must have been an awful moment for her, but she was sisterly and generous, and we should acknowledge that. But the second thing is it's not just the Lib Dems. That whole sort of centrist melt bit of politics has lost almost every plausible leader. You know, all the Labour centrist leaders have one way or another left. You know, Alan Johnson was on the telly earlier on being very strident, but he's left politics to write books. David Miliband's gone off to run a charity in New York. All those people who left the Labour Party to join small new parties have vanished. Where's Luciana Berger this morning? She failed there. Where's Chuka Amuna? All those people who were meant to be the centre of this great new rassemblement of sort of centrist, sensible, centre-left forces in British politics, they've all vanished. And I think that means there's going to be a really big reshaping, not just in the Labour Party, but to the centre and left of the Labour Party as well. I've no idea what's going to happen, but it's going to be fascinating.
It is going to be fascinating. The reshaping is something that Jeremy can talk to us about as well. Jeremy?
Yes, well, of course, it starts in the Commons, doesn't it? That's what this is all about, this reshaping. And it starts on the government benches here with what is still technically a projection, but we're pretty sure this is how it's going to end up. The Conservatives on 364 seats with just 5 more to declare. And, of course, they had to get across the winning line, 326, and they've done that and some. And if you look back at the last election, 2017, and at 2010, and even 2015, which was a majority, but only a small one of a dozen seats, we haven't seen a clear result like this since back to the early or mid-noughties. So this is a real difference from what we're used to in general elections in the UK, where we've had these indeterminate results for so long. For Labour, it's a terrible story. Let's just have a look at where we think they're going to end up. We do think that they will be above 200. So we think 203, still below the 209 that Michael Foot got in the disastrous 83 election. For the SNP, a fantastic night. Look at this, bouncing back in Scotland with 48. And then the Liberal Democrats actually in reverse. Plaid Cymru with 4 still, and the Greens, Caroline Lucas with 1, and the others, mainly Northern Ireland, 18. So, extraordinary. And it leaves us, we think, with a 78-seat majority for the Conservatives, with all but the last few to still be counted. So, a very clear result and a brilliant, brilliant night for Boris Johnson.
Jeremy, thanks very much. Jeremy there with the latest picture in the House of Commons, because we're almost at the end of this run of results, and this democratic process is almost complete for this general election of 2019, just a few results to go. What's the result then in terms of the financial markets? We were talking about the level of the pound sterling much earlier on with Faisal Islam at that point, but my colleague Simon Jack, our business editor, is in the City of London. And Simon, tell us what's going on there.
Thank you, Hugh. Yes, I'm here at the Barclays trading floor, where a few hardy souls have been here all night to keep their eye on political developments. Let me show you exactly what happened to the value of the pound against the dollar on the release of that exit poll. I can show you that graphic now, and you can see there is a very sharp jump indeed from $1.32 to $1.35. That might not sound much, but in financial exchange terms, foreign exchange terms, that is a very big move indeed. The financial bookies had already installed Boris as the favourite, but did not perhaps expect him to romp home in the style that he did. Ian Chew is a currency trader here, specialising in sterling, and has been here all night. Looking at that chart, a very significant move in the value of the pound. What is that telling us?
Yeah, good morning. It's telling us that the market has interpreted this as clarity, for the political backdrop. Over the last few years, we've had a lot of uncertainty, and this actually takes some of that uncertainty away. We've had a circa sort of 2.5% move on a trade-weighted basis, and making new highs from over the last sort of 3 years as sterling sort of breaks higher, and the market and the client investor base, is more comfortable with the potential backdrop.
Okay, so it strips out a level of uncertainty. You've got a functioning government with a functioning majority, but you've then also got a government which is intent on delivering Brexit by the end of next year. Some people think that is difficult. Is this it for the move in the pound? Are they going to start focusing on that now?
Yeah, I don't think that this is it just yet. I think that is definitely where the focus is going to be, and the talk's going to be a lot about Brexit now, obviously, and the potential of the transition, as well as potential of a Scottish referendum. But I think that's a lot further down the line, sort of 2021. But yeah, there's going to be a shift in the focus to Brexit now. But I think there has been large underweights in UK assets, and
people have been shying away from the UK because of the political uncertainty.
Exactly right. And so clarity enables the investor client base. It gives them a bit more confidence, and so I think you could see a continuation of flows into sterling. And I think actually the lack of volatility that we've seen after the move, the exit poll was pretty large, and you saw that move in sterling, as you alluded to, and it's
held on to those gains.
Exactly. It hasn't given any gains back, and so that lack of volatility that we've seen a lot of volatile moves in sterling in recent years, and actually it's holding on to those gains so far.
And the reason we care about the value of the pound, what does it tell us? It tells us about the level of confidence in the UK economy, how favourably international investors see the UK and their economic prospects.
Yeah, I think so. And how attractive we are as an investable country. So it'll be interesting to see where other UK markets open up as well.
All right, Ian, thanks very much indeed. So you saw that big move there, a surprisingly large majority. As I say, the financial bookies had already backed Boris to win, but the margin of his victory has taken some by surprise. But financial markets being at there, we'll find something else to worry about, and I think the focus will now shift to what's the negotiating posture going to be? Can he get a deal done by 2020? They'll find something, an entirely new thing to worry about, as financial markets always do.
Simon, many thanks once again. Simon Jack there with the latest for us in the City of London. We can see the strap there on the screen talking about Northern Ireland and the SDLP gaining foil and Belfast South. So let's take a look at the picture in Northern Ireland, which has again changed quite a bit overnight. And let's join Reeta in our counting room again. And Reeta, tell us what's happening to the state of the parties in Northern Ireland.
Well, this is the scoreboard as it stands. 17 of the 18 seats have been declared. And as you can see, there have been losses for the DUP and gains for the SDLP and the Alliance Party. And what this means is that it's possible by the end of this election that nationalist MPs will outnumber unionist MPs in Westminster for the first time. Let me show you some of the seats that have changed hands. So Belfast North, this is a gain for Sinn Féin. It's a seat that they'd been chasing for a long time, and they have taken this seat from Nigel Dodds. Nigel Dodds, the DUP's leader in Westminster, he's out. That's a Sinn Féin gain. North Down, now this is a surprise gain for the cross-party alliance party. They've taken this seat from what Lady Sylvia Herman was an independent MP. She was standing down, and this was a seat that had been targeted heavily by the DUP, but in fact it's the alliance party that's come through and won that. And the SDLP have taken 2 seats. They've taken Belfast South from the DUP and also Foyle from Sinn Féin. And these mean that there will now be a Remain voice from Northern Ireland in Westminster. The SDLP, a Remain supporting party, and this could mean a change in the complexion in the Commons of the sort of representation that you're getting from Northern Ireland. And it'll be interesting, really, given that Boris Johnson, with his Brexit strategy and the negotiations that he's going to have to do, he's going to face a different sort of pressure within the Commons, given these 2 SDLP gains.
That's interesting, Reeta. Thank you very much. And Andrew, I suppose we should pick up and ask, what does that changing picture mean when we think of the fact that, you know, there's been no Stormont Assembly in action in Northern Ireland for over 3 years now, and this balance has now changed quite significantly. Nigel Dodds losing his seat. What is this telling us?
Well, it's a moment. I don't know if you have tears to shed, but you might consider shedding them for the DUP. It's not just that they've lost 2 seats, which is not a very large number, nor even that the balance has tilted towards the nationalists in Northern Irish seats. It's, if you think about it, the DUP is now in a position where Boris Johnson's withdrawal agreement, whatever the Prime Minister says, does involve customs declarations on goods running from Northern Ireland to Great Britain and probably vice versa. That has infuriated parts of the DUP with the government here, but it's also made Northern Irish business very angry, part of it with the DUP. So that's weakened their position. Then, finally, they have lost their great leverage in terms of the numbers in the House of Commons, because the Tories no longer need to turn to them. They might even ask for their money back. The DUP are in a much, much weaker position, and I think the entire constitutional balance of power between Northern Ireland and Great Britain is changed. It's like a tooth which has suddenly become slightly wiggly. It's nothing dramatic, but it's a real moment.
Really, what could the DUP do, if anything, if they want to really try to get some changes to that withdrawal agreement? Sammy Wilson earlier was telling us, so, you know, there's room to negotiate, there's room to put pressure on, and ultimately it is the Conservative and Unionist Party, as they were saying earlier. But are you saying that their leverage has gone totally?
Not totally, but it's much, much less than it was. They now depend upon the Conservatives remembering that they are the Conservative and Unionist Party and really wanting to hold them in. Alternatively, they could do the one thing that seems almost unthinkable. They could start to talk to Dublin about the future.
And what would that mean?
That would mean all sorts of things. We are beginning to see, because of this withdrawal agreement, at least for the next 4 years, an Irish economy, which is a united Irish economy, more or less inside the EU rules, while the rest of us are outside. That is something entirely new. And people in Northern Ireland, like people everywhere else, are also pragmatic, and they look at business and prosperity, and they ask themselves where their best interests may lie. This is not very good for unionism as a political cause.
When we look at the SDLP and the Alliance Party making gains, again, that is to do with business principally in many areas, saying that, you know, who may well have backed unionists in the past, saying, you know, we don't like the uncertainty, we don't like the stance you've taken, we don't think it's been helpful. That's what they've been saying in interviews all along.
The forms, the bureaucracy, they don't like any of that. And of course, the SDLP and the Alliance Party are nationalist parties who will take their seats at Westminster, unlike Sinn Féin.
Exactly. Vicky, that's an interesting perspective, isn't it? And again, that'll be a different kind of texture to the new House of Commons, when we've been so used to turning to the DUP repeatedly in the past 2 years to see what they think, where they're going to jump, how are they going to support or not support the government. That's all gone.
And it actually really irritated the nationalists in Northern Ireland, because we were seeing it through the prism of the House of Commons, as we do so often, and of course that was the DUP dominating. But I think there's an issue too, that withdrawal agreement bill, if that is put through the House of Commons by a Conservative Party, which is mainly representing England and Wales, then that is also putting pressure on the Union. You've got the SNP dominant in Scotland and presumably a second referendum being rejected by Boris Johnson against their will. And then you've got this bill and an agreement which is going to affect everybody in Northern Ireland, including businesses, that also being put through the House of Commons against the wishes of people in Northern Ireland. It's incredibly unpopular with everyone there.
So how you is the you in the UK any longer?
We shall see. And talking of which, of course, the picture in Scotland has changed. Let's have a quick look at the state of the parties in Scotland. If you're just joining us, it's nearly 7 o'clock in the morning, and the state of the parties in Scotland looking like this. The SNP, 13 gains on 48 seats. The Conservatives losing 7 seats in Scotland, unlike all the gains they made elsewhere. The Lib Dems on 4, they've lost their leader, Joe Swinson. Labour back to 1 seat in Scotland, they've lost 6. Lorna Gordon, our correspondent, is in Edinburgh. And Lorna, what would you pick out as the moments of the night there in Scotland?
Well, Jo Swinson losing her seat in East Dunbartonshire certainly has to be one of the moments of the night. I mean, this has been a very impressive result for the SNP. Nicola Sturgeon, Scotland's First Minister and leader of the SNP, in fact, called it an exceptional result. She said this sends a message to Boris Johnson that Scotland doesn't want Boris Johnson, doesn't want to leave the EU, and wants Scotland's future in Scotland's hands. She says it's a strong endorsement for a renewed, refreshed and strengthened mandate to offer Scotland a choice of an alternative future. Of course, the challenge with that, as we've been hearing, is the fact that Boris Johnson has said that he doesn't want to give what's called a Section 30 order. He sees the Scottish referendum that was held in 2014 as a once-in-a-generation event. Nonetheless, Nicola Sturgeon has said that she will ask for permission to hold a second referendum before Christmas, so we expect her to make that formal request for a Section 30 order within the next few days, with a view to holding a referendum perhaps in the second half of next year. So Boris Johnson might have a clear mandate now, according to Nicola Sturgeon, to take England out of the EU, but she says he must accept that she has a mandate to give Scotland a chance for an alternative future.
Lorna, thank you very much again. Lorna Gordon there with some of the thoughts on the picture overnight in Scotland, the rapidly changing picture there in Scotland overnight. Look at this scene in central London. This is where we are expecting the Prime Minister to emerge. Look at that. Look at that little motto there in the background, the People's Government, Andrew. What do you make of that?
We don't like the people's used in that way in this country. It's a bit French, or possibly even Russian. The people's is slightly odd.
Le peuple.
I know, exactly.
Yes. But then they were servants of the people, New Labour, weren't they?
Yes, but we have a parliamentary democracy and the people are represented by all sorts of other people.
Well, anyway, that's the theme, the People's Government.
Yes.
And this is where we're expecting the Prime Minister to appear, possibly in the next few minutes. We simply don't know, to be honest. But he'll make that first speech after the count. He made a few remarks at the count in Uxbridge. He talked about the one nation kind of conservatism that he wants to promote, and he wants to govern as a one nation conservative. Will he offer a more precise definition of that, not least because of the changing picture across the UK, not least in Scotland, where there's a very different picture to the rest of the UK. But it'll be interesting to see what the tone that he strikes, what he says about Brexit and the pace of change, and the kind of domestic priorities that he's going to chase. He did mention a few things earlier on in terms of more police officers and more hospitals, more GPs and nurses and all the rest of it. He'll probably underline those again. But this, Andrew, really is his opportunity at 7 o'clock in the morning, having just really won this very big majority in historical terms. This is his chance to strike a tone for the government that he will lead for the next few years. This is the scene just outside Downing Street, where I suspect that the cavalcade will make its way fairly shortly.
There it comes.
Here they come, out of Downing Street onto Whitehall and past the Cenotaph and down to the down to the Queen Elizabeth Conference Centre just opposite Westminster Abbey. So on the way, what do you expect?
Well, I think the key word that you used there, Hugh, is tone. Because he has won this huge majority, comparatively speaking, from lots of areas of the country which once voted Labour. There's a lot of very hurt and disappointed people, a lot of people worried about things like child poverty and the closure of Sure Start centres and libraries and so on and so on. Is he going to reach out and address those people as well as those who voted for him? Is he going to talk about more than that singular Brexit promise? Is he going to start to flesh out what being a one-nation Conservative means? Because it's a very kind of warm and cuddly phrase. Very often it doesn't mean very much. So we want to hear some detail for him.
But the fact we don't know, because the manifesto was so thin, it was all about Brexit, pretty much, wasn't it? And if you look at the manifesto, there was no detail in there. He had promised changes to social care, for example, that issue which has just been left unresolved for a number of years by all sorts of governments. Is he going to use this majority, this substantial majority, to push this kind of thing through, or not? How's he going to use the majority? What's he going to do with the power?
Is he going to be open and winning and encouraging people in, or is he going to be triumphalist and breastbeating and I did it and that's that? That's going to be really interesting.
We have 647 results in, and we just have 3 to go. I'm just wondering at this point, Vicky, you have some intelligence that one of those might take a while.
Well, we're hearing from the people down in Cornwall. So there's a constituency of St Ives, which includes the Isles of Scilly. They've had trouble because there's been a storm and they cannot get the ballot boxes even back onto the main island, St Mary's, to get it to the mainland. And there's talk this might be delayed not just till later today, but possibly till Monday.
Monday?
Which would be pretty astonishing.
Well, I've got a news for you. We're not sitting here till Monday.
Go on, you can do it.
Absolutely
you can do it.
Not. And I remember one count back in South Wales in Carmarthen back in, I think it was October 74. No, it was February 74, when the result basically didn't come until late on Friday afternoon. We thought that was a long wait. So St Ives actually will put that into the shade, won't it, really? That was a majority of 3, by the way, which was one of those exciting counts in...
Well, we haven't got to the point where it could end up being a recount.
Exactly.
There is no broadcaster in the country whose bladder could stand it.
No, I think that's probably right, although some would give it a go, I think. Yeah, some would give it a go, yeah. So this is the image. If you're just joining us here on BBC, BBC News and on BBC One, it's 7:05 in the morning, and Boris Johnson's Conservatives have won a very decisive victory in this general election, and they're heading for a majority of 80 seats. We're just expecting another 3 results in, but so far the Conservatives have gained 47 seats in this general election. Labour have lost a whopping 59 seats. The SNP have gained 13. The Lib Dems are down 1, what is for them a very poor performance, and they've lost their leader in this election. And the Alliance Party of Northern Ireland have gained a seat, and the picture in Northern Ireland we were describing earlier. This is the scene at the Queen Elizabeth Conference Centre. We are staying with this because we're expecting the Prime Minister to appear at any moment. But at any moment could, of course, mean 2 or 3 minutes or more. But we're expecting him to appear, and that'll be the first major statement by Boris Johnson following his re-election as Prime Minister. He made a few remarks at the count, as I say earlier, in Uxbridge, but this will be the considered statement which will set the tone for his premiership from now on as a Prime Minister who has a big majority in the House of Commons and who, as Andrew Marr was telling us earlier, is now a very powerful figure.
Hugh, could we just dwell a little bit more on that phrase, the people's government? Because if it means a government for all the people, then that's unexceptionable and warm and welcoming. But the problem with it is, if it's the people's government and you disagree with it about something, are you disagreeing with the people? Does that make you an enemy of the people? It's a phrase that it's loaded in different ways. Now, they haven't had very much time, I imagine, to sort this all out and get their phrase and so forth. But it rings slightly oddly in my ears.
Well, it rings as well because, of course, the will of the people has been one of the big phrases of, of the Brexit.
Will of the people. And if you're against the people, what does that make you?
Well, enemy of the people,
exactly.
I suppose, isn't that right?
There you go.
Yes.
There you go.
I mean, a lot of this is about whether this election result, a huge win for Boris Johnson, the Conservatives, but is it a massive endorsement of him, or is it a huge vote for Brexit, or is it a rejection of Jeremy Corbyn and his policies? And I think that's part of the point here, is that it's a combination probably of all of those things, but it does mean that the people against Boris Johnson, the numbers against him, are still there. There will be people watching this today appalled, frankly, at what's happened. They cannot envisage him as their Prime Minister, they don't want him as their Prime Minister, but of course the people who are against him splintered across a number of different parties, which has allowed him to win and win big.
Vicky, above all, is it not also a rejection of parliamentary paralysis and a lack of certainty? We're hearing from the money markets, but it's not just the money markets. A lot of people looked at British politics over the last few years and it goes endless arguments, and they just had enough.
They did, they hated it. And even those people who'd voted Remain, when I went around the country talking to some of them, that was what was striking, that a lot of them were saying, we've had it, actually. We do need to move on now. 3.5 years of this, we can't carry on. People running businesses, for example, just wanted a decisive result.
Absolutely.
And that seems to be what's happened.
I think, again, just some of the statistics and totting up the figures for parties who are either in favour of a second referendum or not, just to pick up the point about how divided people are. A majority, if you count up all of the parties that supported the principle of holding a referendum, well then over 50% of the votes were cast for those parties. So a majority, if you want to look at it that way, a majority who voted in this election voted for parties who back a form of second referendum. So that will be an argument, I suppose, that some people will put forward, but a very difficult context, isn't it, Andrew, when you're in the House of Commons with, where there's a government with a majority of 80.
Already, but the
this
Remain
is not
alliance,
an argument we're going to hear now, I suspect, from Boris Johnson.
I suspect you're right.
But they couldn't work together in Parliament. That was the point. The Remain alliance, so they called themselves.
Never could. You're quite right.
They couldn't agree, and actually the same thing has happened in this election. You saw Labour and the Liberal Democrats fighting it out in lots of seats across the country, where actually, if they had some kind of alliance, they would have been able to oppose the Conservatives.
Let's just pause for a second. Sorry, Vicky. Let's just pause for a second. As soon as I do this, of course, the Prime Minister will turn up and then I'll be wrong. But anyway, it's now 7:10. What I'd like to do is ask Reeta to take us through some of the seats, the big sort of named seats that have changed hands overnight, because if you're just joining us here at 7:10 in the morning, we can look at those. There's applause happening, so I'm just wondering whether he's on his way. Oh, this is Michael Gove. Well, fancy that.
Maybe he's seized
Let's see what he has to say.
What's he going to say?
Friends, today we celebrate a victory for the British people. Our fellow citizens reminded us why this is such a wonderful country, because they comprehensively rejected Jeremy Corbyn's politics of division, extremism and anti-Semitism. And they voted in record numbers for a Prime Minister dedicated to restoring trust in our democracy by getting Brexit done. So this new government says thank you to the British people. We will strive every day to live up to the confidence that you have shown in us. But I also want to say something to a very special group of British people, our Jewish friends and neighbours. You have had to live in fear for months now, concerned that we would have a Prime Minister who trafficked in anti-Jewish rhetoric and embraced anti-Jewish terrorists. You should never have to live in fear again. I also want to thank so many of the people who worked so hard to make this victory possible. I want to thank the members of the Conservative Party, the activists, supporters, candidates, friends and family who worked so hard, who gave so much in order to deliver this victory. But I also want to thank some others. I want to thank those people who stepped outside their tribes and their traditions to speak the truth. I want to thank those people who said that Jeremy Corbyn was unfit to be our Prime Minister and Boris Johnson was the right person to lead our country. Labour politicians like Ian Austin, John Woodcock, Ivan Lewis and Gisela Stewart showed amazing courage. They were joined by so many other people who had voted Labour all their life. They are the best of us in so many ways, and I am delighted that they recognised that Boris Johnson was the right person to lead this country. Our victory is their victory. Our victory was built on the votes of those who originally supported Leave and wanted that vote to be honoured, but it was also built on the votes of those who chose Remain, but who believe, above all, that democratic votes must be respected. They recognise that democracy is precious, and they wanted a PM who could restore trust, and that Prime Minister is Boris Johnson. Thanks to Boris Johnson, there are Conservatives representing people across this country, from Banff and Buchan in the far northeast to Bude and Bugley Salterton in the southwest. And thanks to Boris's leadership, we have Conservative MPs, talented young Conservative MPs, who've served in the NHS and in the front line of public services, who are now the new MPs in Bishop Auckland, Blythe Valley, Bolsover, Bassetlaw, Garshalton, North West Durham, Kensington. And so many others. Under Boris's leadership, we are truly a party for the whole nation. Just think about it. Next year, both the Durham Miners' Gala and the Notting Hill Carnival will take place in seats represented by Conservative MPs. And we will, of course, govern as we campaigned, as a one-nation party, determined to bring economic and social justice to the overlooked families and the undervalued communities who need our government. We know, as the Prime Minister has pointed out, that educational ability is equally spread across this country, but opportunity is not, which is why we will level up funding and life chances in all our schools. We know that the NHS is one of the most precious institutions created in this country, and at last it will receive the funding that it deserves, so it is there when everyone needs it. We also know that economic productivity is not equally spread across this country, and we will invest in the infrastructure, the skills and the opportunities that communities in the North and the Midlands need in order to ensure that across this country we are firing on all cylinders, truly an opportunity nation for all. And of course that one nation vision, that vision that won, was articulated from the moment he arrived on the steps of Downing Street by our Prime Minister. He said then that we should not listen to the cynics and the sceptics, the doomsters and the gloomsters. He said that Britain could be revived, that the opportunity that Brexit provided to bring our nation together and to unleash our nation's potential was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Well, the British people have seized that opportunity. They have placed their trust in us, and that is thanks to the leadership of our Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. And before we welcome the Prime Minister to the stage, we have a video.
No, I don't think we do.
Well, that was Michael Gove, and they're now going to run a video probably of celebrating the campaign. But I'm just wondering, we were talking earlier about tone and the kind of message we're expecting. Andrew, what did you make of that by Michael Gove?
Well, interesting that he talked about infrastructure and those parts of the country left out. One thing we know about Boris Johnson from his time as London mayor is he likes building things. He likes commissioning big things. And I think we're going to see a big infrastructure programme for the North. I think the political establishment, put it that way, have realised how much of England in particular has been left behind. All of those East Coast seats, those towns, those parts of the West Midlands which haven't had the investment and the attention they deserved over the last 10 years, really since the financial crash of 2008. And I would imagine that kind of investment is going to be a big part of this new government. Now, if they put in the investment, if they really think about those seats, some of which they've just won for the first time, then we could see the country coming together again.
Your thoughts, Vicky?
Well, just watching Michael Gove there and thinking how times change. You think back to when he pulled the rug out from underneath Boris Johnson, when he wanted to go for the leadership the first time round, saying that he didn't think he was the right person who could be the leader of the party to be Prime Minister. And it just strikes me that this is why the Conservatives are here today, because they are pretty ruthless when it comes to their leaders, either getting rid of them if they don't like them or bringing in people who they think can win for them. And I spoke to numerous Conservative MPs during the leadership race who didn't want Boris Johnson, had reservations, but actually thought, do you know, I think he can win for us, therefore I'm prepared to put my reservations to one side because he can reach parts of the country that other leaders can't, and that has proven to be true.
And we should remember that for a lot of Conservatives, including very senior Conservatives, going for Boris Johnson not that long ago was a huge risk. He's taken big risks, not least in holding this election when he did, but they have taken a big risk in him, and that may be why there's a sort of element of love-in going on at the moment.
Talking about love-in, let's look at some of the front pages, because we've got some of them already, and if the Prime Minister emerges, we'll be back there straight away. But let's look at some of these front pages. Let's start with the Daily Mail. And there you have a rejoice. Of course, that is an echo of one of Mrs Thatcher's words at the end of the Falklands campaign. Rejoice, Boris set for thumping win. Well, he's got the thumping win now. The Daily Express, yet another Boris supporting publication. The British lion roars for Boris and Brexit is the Express's take on that. The Mirror will have a rather different take. Let's look at it. It's nightmare before Christmas, according to the Mirror. Johnson heading for huge majority. Well, the majority is going to be 80, we think, and there are just 2 seats yet to come in. Let's look at the front page of The Sun, and that is carry on Boris. Well, fancy that for a play on words. The Tory landslide and Corbyn's on his bike, says The Sun. And then The Scotsman, Johnson's election gamble pays off. Well, I think we can all agree that the gamble's paid off, as Andrew's just told us. That's the headline in The Scotsman. We'll have a look at some other papers later on, but all of them reflecting the fact that, of course, it's a thumping great win for Boris Johnson in this election. It's 7:20 in the morning. We have 2 results yet to come, 648 already declared, and Boris Johnson looking to return as Prime Minister with a majority of 80 seats in this House of Commons. The last time the Tories had a majority, anything like this, was when Margaret Thatcher was re-elected in 1987 with a majority of around 100 seats. So it's not since then. So it's a long time since the Tories came back with a majority like this.
So, thinking back to those Thatcher years, one thing we know now, of course, is that Margaret Thatcher had a very clear agenda about
the
how
Prime Minister's there, Andrew.
Okay,
let's join him.
Thanks for coming. Well, my friends, good morning, everybody, my friends. Well, we did it. We did it. We pulled it off, didn't we? We pulled it off. We broke the deadlock. We ended the gridlock. We smashed the roadblock. And in this glorious pre-breakfast moment before a new dawn rises on a new day and a new government, I want, first of all, to pay tribute to good colleagues who lost their seats through no fault of their own in the elections just gone by. And I, of course, want to congratulate absolutely everybody involved in securing the biggest Conservative majority since the 1980s, which was literally, as I look around, literally before many of you were born. And with this mandate and this majority, we will at last be able to do what? You've been paying attention. Because this election means that getting Brexit done is now the irrefutable, irresistible, unarguable decision of the British people. And with this election, I think we've put an end to all those miserable threats of a second referendum. And I say respectfully to our stentorian friend in the blue 12-star hat. That's it. Time to put a sock in the megaphone and give everybody some peace. But I have a message to all those who voted for us yesterday, especially those who voted for us Conservatives, One Nation Conservatives, for the first time. You may only have lent us your vote, and you may not think of yourself as a natural Tory. And as I think I said 11 years ago to the people of London when I was elected in what was thought of as a Labour city, your hand may have quivered over the ballot paper as before you put your cross in the Conservative box. And you may intend to return to Labour next time round. And if that is the case, I am humbled that you have put your trust in me and that you have put your trust in us. And I and we will never take your support for granted. And I will make it my mission to work night and day, flat out, to prove you right in voting for me this time and to earn your support in the future. And I say to you that in this election, your voice has been heard, and about time too. Because we politicians have squandered the last 3.5 years, in squabbles about Brexit. We've even been arguing and about the tone of our arguments. I will put an end to all that nonsense, and we will get Brexit done on time by the 31st of January. No ifs, no buts, no maybes. Leaving the European Union as one united kingdom, taking back control of our laws, borders, money, our trade, immigration system, delivering on the democratic mandate of the people. And at the same time, this One Nation Conservative government will massively increase our investment in the NHS, the health service that represents the very best of our country, with this single beautiful idea that whoever we are, rich, poor, young, old, the NHS is there for us when we are sick. And every day that service performs miracles. And that is why the NHS is this One Nation Conservative government's top priority. And so we will deliver 50,000 more nurses and 50 million more GP surgery appointments. And how many new hospitals? 40. Correct. And we will deliver long-term NHS budget enshrined in law, 650 million extra every week, Health Secretary. and all the other priorities that you, the people of this country, voted for. Record spending on schools, an Australian-style points-based immigration system, more police, how many? 20,000. Colossal new investments in infrastructure, in science, using our incredible technological advantages to make this country the cleanest, greenest on earth, with the most far-reaching environmental programme. And you, the people of this country, voted to be carbon neutral in this election. You voted to be carbon neutral by 2050, and we'll do it. You also voted to be Corbyn neutral by Christmas, by the way, and we'll do that too. You voted for all these things, and it is now this government, this people's government, it's our solemn duty to deliver on each and every one of those commitments, and it is a great and heavy responsibility, a sacred trust. For me, for every newly elected Conservative MP, for everyone in this room and everyone in this party. And I repeat that in winning this election, we have won votes and the trust of people who have never voted Conservative before, and people who have always voted for other parties. Those people want change. We cannot, must not let them down. And in delivering change, we must change too. We must recognise the incredible reality that we now speak as a one-nation Conservative party, literally for everyone from Woking to Workington, from Kensington, I'm proud to say, to Clwyd South, from Surrey Heath to Sedgefield, from Wimbledon to Wolverhampton. And as the nation hands us this historic mandate, we must rise to the challenge and to the level of expectations. And Parliament must change so that we in Parliament are working for you, the British people. And that is what we will now do, isn't it? That is what we will now do. Let's go out and get on with it. Let's unite this country. Let's spread opportunity to every corner of the UK with superb education, superb infrastructure and technology. Let's get Brexit done. But first, my friends, let's get breakfast done too. Thank you all. Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you all very much. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Classic Boris Johnson, a triumphant victory for him, and that reflected in the enthusiasm and the exuberance of the statement there of the Prime Minister, looking at a hefty majority in this new House of Commons and then outlining for us in a great torrent of a speech there what he intends to do. So we were talking about tone earlier, we were talking about content, we were talking about intentions and political direction. Andrew, what do you make of it?
Well, apart from the obvious point that we need severe curbs on alliteration from the new People's Government as soon as possible, I think a lot of, who knows, people will make their own minds up, but a lot of Boris sceptics and even Boris allergics will be looking at that and thinking, actually, I'm beginning to hear what I was hoping for. I'm beginning to hear the more generous, open-sided aspect of Boris Johnson, because the biggest single question in British politics this morning is, who is Boris Johnson politically? And there's one very close friend of his, a very active Conservative who knows him well, who says, do you know, he's much more Michael Heseltine than he is Margaret Thatcher. And that sounded to me more Heseltine than Thatcher. And if that is an indication of where he's going to go, then there's a lot of the, as I say, the centre ground of politics who will be listening to him with their ears freshly cocked and a little more enthusiastically.
And there'll be Conservative MPs who backed him in the last Parliament who will be thinking, hang on a second, that's not the Boris Johnson that we backed in terms of tone and all the content and the kind of big spending and all the rest of it. So it's not entirely straightforward.
No, it's not. I mean, that speech is much more the speech that he would have made as London Mayor. And his point there about people's hands quivering over the ballot paper, he knows because that's what happened in London when he was London Mayor. So he is used to this situation in that sense. But yes, in terms of tensions ahead, I think it would have been worse with a smaller majority. I think the fact that the majority is so huge, of course, gives him a lot of leeway. If you think about those on the right of the party, yes, they were on the same side when it came to Brexit. Actually, you could say Boris Johnson's someone who talked about an amnesty for illegal immigrants. That would be something that actually not many people in the ERG would have said would have been a good thing to do.
And of course, it's Brexit that broke everything, broke all of those old allegiances. I mean, the real Michael Heseltine would not agree with what I've just said because he so disagrees with Boris Johnson about Brexit. That's the fissure which ran straight through the Conservative family. Boris Johnson was on one side, but now I think he is visibly, audibly reaching over to the others.
It is 7:31 here on BBC News, and you're watching our coverage of the general election. You're watching Election 2019.
Hello, good morning. The Conservatives have won the general election with their biggest majority since 1987. Labour, meanwhile, has had its worst performance in 3 decades. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn said he was disappointed and wouldn't lead his party into any future general election. It was a poor night too for the Liberal Democrats, whose leader Jo Swinson lost her seat. Jessica Parker's report contains flash photography.
He knows it. The Conservatives have won a majority in an election Boris Johnson described as historic.
That gives us now, in this new government, the chance to respect the democratic will of the British people, to change this country for the better, and to unleash the potential of the entire people of this country.
They're delighted, the Tories making those inroads into Labour heartlands that voted leave.
I would like to thank Boris, because I would say that I'm going to be on that train on Monday. I'm going to London. We're going to get Brexit done.
For his party, a major defeat. Jeremy Corbyn acknowledged a disappointing result.
I want to also make it clear that I will not lead the party in any future general election campaign. I will discuss with our party to ensure there is a process now of reflection on this result.
Glum faces here. Bolsover, Grimsby, Sedgefield, Darlington and Don Valley among Labour's losses.
There was 2 fronts I was fighting on. One front was the fact that so many of my voters could not and did not want to support Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister. But the second front was the Labour Party's position on Brexit, that we'd moved to a position of being more like a Stop Brexit, Remain party.
Have you lost your seat, Miss Swinson?
And a huge blow for the Lib Dems. Jo Swinson's lost her seat and will no longer lead the party.
For millions of people in our country, these results will bring dread and dismay, and people are looking for hope.
Arriving at Conservative headquarters, they might be in the party mood. Boris Johnson wanted to drive his agenda through. The door is now open. Jessica Parker, BBC News.
Well, as we saw, the SNP took Jo Swinson's seat. They've won 49 out of 59 constituencies in Scotland. Nicola Sturgeon's party backed a second referendum on EU membership during their campaign. The SNP also ran on securing a new vote on Scottish independence from the UK, something which they will push for in the coming parliaments.
You know, I don't pretend that every single person that voted SNP yesterday will necessarily support independence, but there has been a strong endorsement in this election of Scotland having a choice over our future, of not having to put up with a Conservative government that we didn't vote for and not having to accept life as a nation outside the European Union. So that independence referendum that was very much at the heart of the SNP's campaign, there is a renewed, refreshed, strengthened mandate for that.
In Northern Ireland, nationalist MPs outnumber unionists for the first time. The Democratic Unionist Party suffered significant defeats. The DUP's deputy leader, Nigel Dodds, lost his seat to the Sinn Féin candidate, John Finucane. The DUP also lost South Belfast. The nationalist SDLP won a landslide there and also in Foyle, meaning it returns to Parliament after losing all its seats last time. All 40 seats in Wales have now been declared, and the Conservatives have made significant gains. They took 6 seats from Labour, including Bridgend in the south, and 4 in the northeast, Wrexham, Dellen, the Vale of Clwyd and Clwyd South. Plaid Cymru held onto all 4 of their seats. The only good news for the Green Party came from Brighton. The party's sole sitting MP and its former leader, Caroline Lucas, comfortably held onto her Brighton Pavilion seat. She's held the position ever since becoming the country's first Green MP in the 2010 election. There is lots more from BBC News online and also on your mobile, where you can look up the results in your constituency. Use our interactive map to search for any seat across the UK on our website or the BBC News app. Back now to Hugh.
Very good morning. You are welcome to the BBC's Election Centre. You're watching Election 2019. It is 7:37 and we are reflecting on the result of a remarkable general election which has produced a big Conservative majority in the House of Commons. Boris Johnson will be staying in number 10 as Prime Minister, but this time he's not going to have to struggle with a hung Parliament and looking for support elsewhere. He has all the support he needs on his own benches. 363 seats so far, just 2 results to come in. 203 to Labour, very bad night for Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party, and he's already said he won't be leading the party into any other elections. And that's where we stand. We've had some remarkable results overnight, but principally we've been looking at lots of Conservative gains in seats which were traditionally Labour. And in Scotland, we've seen some remarkable results too for the Scottish National Party, and we've had a party leader in Jo Swinson for the Lib Dems losing her seat. So lots of things to catch up on as we reflect on what's happened. The political landscape has completely changed overnight. So let's join Reeta in our results centre, and Reeta will take us through some of the dramatic results that we've been looking at and those seats that have been changing hands. Reeta?
Yes, a changed map indeed. And here are some of the names that have contributed to that dramatic change. With some of these constituencies, people would quip that you didn't count Labour votes in the past, you weighed them. Well, that has really changed tonight. Names like Workington Man became an emblem of the Conservative campaign this time round in a way that Worcester Woman or Mondeo Man were for Labour campaigns in the past. Well, it worked, and Workington has gone Conservative. Darlington and Bishop Auckland, both in County Durham, both of them Labour heartlands or previous Labour heartlands, they're both now Conservative. And Redcar, Boris Johnson quipped during the night that this was now Blue Car. Well, politically, he's got a point, because let's just have a look at some of the figures here in Redcar. So Jacob Young, 26-year-old Jacob Young, now the Conservative MP for Redcar. The Conservatives got 46% of the vote, but what I want to show you is the change in the vote. Labour's vote just going through the floor, losing 18 points there, and the Conservatives on 13. Brexit Party also on 7, and that represents a swing of Labour to Conservative of 15%. And we've seen this sort of swing in seats like that throughout the night. Just show you some of the other names. Blythe Valley and Burnley also being taken by the Conservatives from Labour. The SNP have also had a good night, coming quite close to matching their score in 2015, which was the high point for the SNP. They've taken seats from the Conservatives, Labour and the Liberal Democrats. Aberdeen South they took from the Conservatives, but the big dramatic gain of the night for them was surely Dunbartonshire East, the seat of Jo Swinson, the Liberal Democrat leader. And look how Amy Callaghan got that victory with a majority of just 149. But it means that she is now sitting in the House of Commons as the Dunbartonshire East MP and not Jo Swinson.
Reeta, many thanks. And Reeta taking us through some of the changes there. Earlier on, we saw Boris Johnson at the rally for Conservative supporters. Well, look at this, with his partner arriving at Downing Street, the Christmas tree there on the left, because of course we're so close to Christmas. This is the first December election since 1923, and the Prime Minister now safely inside Downing Street, this time as the Prime Minister of a government with a majority, and a big majority, in the House of Commons. And that's because, of course, Labour has suffered many losses. The Lib Dems too did not make the gains that they were expecting in lots of those Conservative seats, especially in the south and the southwest of England. So let's talk to Baroness Sal Brinton, who's now co-leader. I think, Sal, that's right, isn't it? Co-leader of the Lib Dems, because Jo has lost her seat?
That's right. I'm interim co-leader with Ed Davey, who is the deputy leader, until the next leader is elected. Understood.
And understandably, it's been a very disappointing night for you as a party, not just to lose your leader in East Dunbartonshire, but also not to make the gains that you were expecting elsewhere. Could you talk us through your thoughts this morning? I know it's quite early, but your thoughts on why it didn't work out?
Well, I think, yes, clearly it was a disappointing night because Jo Swinson's campaign had been very positive, offering a brighter future, saying to people, you know, if you want Brexit to go away, there is a way to do that by stopping Brexit. And unfortunately, the voices of nationalism and populism, both north and south of the border, beat both her in her seat, but also nationally as well. But I think there are a couple of nuggets of gold. I mean, our share of the vote went up 50%, over 4.1% from 2017. And we have got some good new MPs in the House, in our group as well. So I think it all is not lost, and every single one of our MPs will continue to fight for our place, if not in Europe, to make sure we get the best deal possible, because we know that it's the best thing for our economy, for the NHS, especially with the workforce, and for us as a society as well. And we will have a team that are able to do that, and that is good news.
Obviously, I take your point about the share of the vote. It's up 4.2%, as you rightly say, but you're on 11 MPs, which is actually one fewer than in 2017. So on that score, and if you think about your potential influence in the House of Commons, that's a pretty dreadful outcome for you.
Well, the irony is our vote has gone up over 1 million votes. And yet we've gone down one seat. And that, I'm afraid, as you all know, for all the minor parties, is one of the problems of the first past the vote post system, where minor parties are treated really, really badly by that. And you know, obviously the Conservatives have won a majority, but for us it is frustrating that we've had a significant increase in the vote across the country. Remain as saying they want us to help stop Brexit. And unfortunately, that didn't materialise into the seats we wanted.
There's been quite a bit of criticism, as you know full well, of the what some people consider to be the rather brutal policy put forward by the party of just revoking Article 50 and just going for it in that sense, which some people thought was profoundly anti-democratic. How damaging do you think that was in hindsight? Although I know that you know, you were behind the policy and you supported the leader's stance on this, but how damaging was that on the doorstep?
Well, I think part of our frustration was that the full phrase was to revoke Article 50 if we have a majority government, and clearly we didn't. We have consistently, since the day after the referendum, argued that there should be a people's vote. It's absolutely fair and square in our manifesto that that's our preferred choice if we didn't have a mandate from the people in the general election, and that's what we were fighting for as well, which is why it was frankly the easier way to actually stop Brexit would have been a people's vote, but we weren't offered that, mainly because Labour just continued to sit on the fence. We had 17 amendments in the last year in the House of Commons asking for a people's vote, and every time they voted against or abstained. So we were stymied by, I'm afraid, Labour's position, as indeed I think, you know, everybody, Labour will be feeling very sore today. The public didn't understand which side they were on. They were very worried about Jeremy Corbyn and anti-Semitism, and I'm afraid that, I think, coloured views, as we've heard from viewers over the night, who said their hands were hovering over the ballot paper. The problem is that Boris Johnson's Get Brexit Done is going to be undone as next year proceeds, because the one thing that we know, and MPs of all parties knew in the last Parliament, is that it won't be done in just over a month. It's going to take years to sort out. And I think the many, many people who think that they voted for Boris Johnson to get this sorted quickly are going to be disappointed, and disappointed very quickly.
Where do you go from here as a party? How soon will you have a new leader in place?
I think the party's board meets on Saturday, and I expect that we will have a new leader at some point in the spring. We have a process to go through, and until the board has met, obviously I won't know the timetable, but I would have thought probably sometime in March.
And what about the job of, you know, the very important job of reviving morale among party workers who will have been working extremely hard in this campaign, only to see a very disappointing result? It's difficult sometimes, isn't it, to get teams back together when they've been through this kind of bruising experience?
Well, I am in absolute awe of our members, supporters and volunteers. I've had loads of messages in, and I know other colleagues have. The one thing that we know as Liberals in the first past the post system is that you face disappointments because the system isn't fair and people feel that their vote often doesn't count. And our members and supporters, I'm sure they will rally round in exactly the way that they have done in the past when we've hit problems, 2015 for example, where we had a surge in membership and an absolute commitment to fighting liberalism and making sure that the voice of liberalism was heard in the country. We will continue with that because we know that there is a very large number of people who wanted us to remain in the EU because they liked our vision of an internationalist, open and tolerant society. I think that's our clarion call to make sure that people, whether they are already supporters of the Liberal Democrats or are thinking about us, will come and join us to make sure that there will be a voice that happens over the next few years.
Sal, very good of you to join us, and thank you very much for responding to us this morning at 10 to 8 in the morning. Sal Brinton there for us for the Lib Dems. Thanks to her. So, the story of the night, and if you're just waking up at 12 minutes to 8 in the morning, you're waking up to the fact that there is a Conservative government with a big majority of 80 seats that is going to be in power now for the next few years. And we've already heard from Michael Gove and we've already heard from Boris Johnson, who's promised big investment, lots of infrastructure spending and getting on with Brexit. That's the kind of summary of the themes that we've had from the Prime Minister this morning, who won his seat in Uxbridge several hours ago. So for the story of the night and for the story of Downing Street, let's join Jeremy Vine.
Here we are in our virtual Downing Street, the same street where we saw Theresa May in 2017 fail to get to the line that would have put her through the door there with an overall majority. Boris Johnson has not failed, that's for sure. Let's just remind you how it all began. The very first result was a sign of what was coming. 11:32 it was. Let's have a look. And it was Blythe Valley. You see, we've put the names of the seats on the tiles here as they pave the way. The first seat, Blythe Valley, that had had a Labour majority of 8,000, red since 1935. How could that go blue? It did. And actually, even on those two Labour seats, you can see Sunderland, Newcastle, there were signs of an increased Tory vote that would have shivered Labour's timbers. OK, we move on. Time wound on through the night. 2 a.m. we got to. Let's see what we knew by then. Again, numerically, they're roughly neck and neck. We only have the exit poll. We can't be sure what's happening, but there's another sign of a colossal change coming because Lee comes in 10 miles from Manchester, 9,500 majority, red Labour since 1922, and it goes to the Conservatives as well. And meanwhile, if you look at the Labour column, yes, they've gained Putney. There's a protective effect for the red seats in London, but the ones that they're winning back. Seats like Jarrow, which are hyper-safe. They can't win an election with just their hyper-safe seats, their heartland seats. They need to go beyond them. But we saw the Tories striking into Labour's heartland as well. So we go to 3 a.m. now. And now you see the Conservatives in their numbers starting to take the lead with 94 seats. At 3 a.m, you can see Wolverhampton South West. That was fairly marginal, a very easy gain on the night for the Conservatives. But just near Wolverhampton on the blue line, Redcar, a 15% swing, gives it to Boris Johnson's party. And meanwhile, in the red seats, the Labour seats, they're all holds of safe seats. In Liverpool, you can see 2 or 3 there. Again, you can't win an election simply by taking your safest seats back. You need to do more than that. So we go again. We go to 4 in the morning, and now the numbers come in. The results are starting to stream in, and we're starting to see the power of this Conservative performance. 4 in the morning, 3 crucial seats. You see Lincoln there. Again, Karen Lee out of the House of Commons. Rother Valley, that was Kevin Barron's seat. Great Grimsby, Melanie on out. 1945. Great Grimsby had been Labour since, and the Conservatives took it, swooped on those 3 seats. On the Labour side, yes, they got Enfield in London because of that protective effect in London. And Bedford was a good result for them because that was quite marginal and they saved it. But it wasn't enough, not nearly enough. Right, 4:30 in the morning. Now we're just glued to these results as they come in. They're streaming in now. Let's have a look at the Conservatives, who now complete the trio of Stoke seats. They took Stoke South at the last general election. Now they've got North and Central Stoke. So the whole of Stoke coloured blue. You see Morley there, Ed Balls' old seat, still blue, staying with the Conservatives. Very, very, very hard to beat at this point, and Labour know it. And we move on now to 5 in the morning. Now, you'll see what happens as suddenly the Conservatives go for the line. Let's have a look here. Over they go, and of all seats, it's Bolsover, right on the line, on the 326 line. Bolsover, the home of the beast of Bolsover, as he's called, Dennis Skinner, in his 80s, about to return to the Commons as Father of the House, knocked out of his seat in this election by the Conservatives. You can only imagine how furious he's going to be, and Labour left a long way behind. I'll complete the line now, because, of course, they didn't just get the majority at 326, they went beyond it. They went some way beyond it. They've got headroom here. They can govern. They can even have their own squabbles and still govern, because they've got plenty enough MPs to do what they want. Look at these seats here. So Wantage, Somerton, those are safe Conservatives. But Keighley, that was the Labour seat that they took. John Grogan was there. Carshalton was a gain from the Liberal Democrats. Henley, the seat that Boris Johnson himself used to have. Yeovil is clearly blue now, gone from the Liberal Democrats several years ago. Chipping Barnet was under threat, but they saved it. All these results were very good. Hendon, they could have lost in London. They took it. Colne Valley, that was an interesting one again. Thelma Walker out of the House of Commons for Labour. Cheltenham, again, battle with the Lib Dems. The Conservatives won. And then we get to Devon, West and Horsham, and they've done it. They did it. They got well beyond the line. And have a look at Labour and how far back they are with their 203 seats. The story of the night ending with Labour, yes, taking Sheffield Hallam, which they could have lost again to the Liberal Democrats, and taking the very important seat to them of Batley and Spen. But 203, a terrible result. And they're left looking at this decisive victory. The illustration here is so powerful, isn't it? Because actually, you see, the Conservatives have done what they needed to do and much, much more. And the door of number 10 is now the door to Mr. Johnson's home for probably the next 5 years.
Indeed, Jeremy. Thanks very much. Jeremy Vine there with the road to Downing Street. And Jeremy, just reflecting there on the very poor Labour performance. And maybe we should reflect as well on the fact that there's been some pretty strongly worded reaction to what's gone on overnight from within the Labour Party. Vicky?
Yeah, I mean, not surprising given the scale of the defeat. But this is from Ruth Smeeth, defeated in Stoke-on-Trent. She was, of course, very much at the centre of some of the anti-Semitism problems in the party. She says, we are a Labour city, we are a Labour area. This is devastating, this is seismic, this is the end. For me, this is about whether the Labour Party has any right to exist, whether we have anything left to say.
Andrew?
That is pretty devastating. And from the inimitable Jess Phillips, with a list of quotes of the night, as it were, she says, this is not a time for easy answers, as much as I wish it was. I wish there was some silver bullet, but I also wish I was a size 10. I think it's often impertinent for unelected journalists to give advice. But if I was going to give any advice at the moment, the Labour Party needs to take its time, not rush into another great frenzy about who's going to be the next leader, not to have factional squabbles, but to really think about this, test the various leaders around the country. There's plenty of time. Test them, get the right result, and if it takes a few months, so be it.
Let's go to Inverness, where Ian Blackford of the Scottish National Party has been waiting very patiently. Ian, good morning to you.
Good morning, Hugh. How are you?
Very well, thanks. It's good of you to join us. Right, well, you've made significant gains for the Scottish National Party overnight. Let's have your perspective on the Scottish political landscape this morning.
Well, it's a very different landscape from the one that you've been discussing south of the border, Hugh. We've won this election quite convincingly. We've taken 45% of the vote. We've increased our representation quite dramatically overnight. The Conservatives have lost more than half their seats. And this election in Scotland was really, as much as anything else, about our right to choose our own future. That's what we asked people to support us on that basis. And the Conservatives were saying, vote for them to stop a second independence referendum. Well, I think they've got their answer. We've no real desire to be taken out of Europe against our will. I regret the fact that people elsewhere in the UK may want to do that. But we were told, as you know, Hugh, in our referendum in 2014 on independence, if we stayed in the UK, we were to lead it, our voices would be respected, and crucially, that we would remain as EU citizens. So we despair at what Boris Johnson is trying to do to us, and I would simply say to the Prime Minister, he has to reflect democracy, and he has to respect the fact that the Scottish Government has a mandate for a referendum on independence. We are now legislating for that in the Scottish Parliament, and Boris Johnson has to do the right thing and recognise that the people of Scotland have that right to have a referendum, and that's been very strongly reinforced with the election result this morning here in Scotland.
I was noticing in some comments on social media about your candidate in Kirkcaldy, Neil Hanvey, who, as you know, is facing disciplinary action because of remarks that he made. Will he take the SNP whip when you are the SNP leader at Westminster? What's your attitude to that?
Well, he was suspended quite rightly when it came to light that he'd made anti-Semitic comments. He's been suspended from the party. He won't be taking the SNP whip, so he stands as he's elected as an independent member of Parliament. We have an SNP group of 47 and Neil is not part of that.
And is that likely to change?
Look, he has to go through a disciplinary process, but he has not been elected as a SNP MP. That was taken from him. He stood as an independent candidate to Westminster, and that's the status that he will have.
Does it surprise you that he was elected given the controversy around him?
That's up to the voters in his constituency. What I am delighted about in the other seats where we stood, that we've had a fantastic result. We've won 47 of the other 58 seats, and that's what we are celebrating this morning.
I'm going to put the point I put to the First Minister earlier, Ian, which is that, yes, you've done well, you've got these gains, you'll be a significant presence at Westminster once again, but unlike in the last Parliament, in this Parliament you're up against a government with a majority of 80, and no matter how effectively you campaign, no matter how loudly you make your case, you frankly can't do much there, given the maths.
Well, at the end of the day, we're the third force in Parliament, and we'll make sure that we make our voices heard. But I'd say to the government in London, recognise that there are administrations in Edinburgh, in Cardiff, and I hope in Belfast as well. And there has to be respect. And we have to recognise that, look, I think in a sense, Hugh, we have a constitutional crisis because we're in a very different place from the rest of the United Kingdom. I regret the fact that people in the rest of the UK seem to want to support Brexit. That is their choice. But also our views must be respected as well, and we can't be dragged out of the European Union against our will. So Boris Johnson has to, I think, show a generosity of spirit and recognise that the SNP, whether it's in government in Edinburgh or the SNP force in Westminster, have a very different proposition. And the fact that Scotland has voted in a different way must be respected. And the way that we respect that is by passing over that power for a referendum to be held in Scotland. That's the right thing to do. Let's make sure that we can get through this in a way that is satisfactory to all sides.
Ian, thanks very much for joining us and for waiting to talk to us. And we'll see you back at Westminster soon, I suppose.
Certainly will.
Thanks very much indeed. Ian Blackford there for the SNP, the Westminster leader of the SNP in Inverness. Our thanks to him. Let's take a look outside the building here at Broadcasting House in central London, and it's light already. The time is just coming up to 8 o'clock in the morning. And we can see there the projected figures for the result of this contest, which is that the Tories will end up on 365, Labour on 203, the SNP on 48, and the Lib Dems on 11. Have down one, with Jo Swinson, their leader, having lost her seat. Plaid Cymru on 4. And then the others, Brexit Party on nothing, and the Greens on 1, and the others on 18. That is the picture, and you are watching Election 2019. So let's head back into the newsroom at New Broadcasting House, keeping an eye on all the news headlines, and let's join Louise once again.
Thanks, Hugh. Good morning. The Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he will work night and day to repay the trust of voters after the Conservatives were confirmed as the winners of the general election by a large majority. The Labour Party has lost swathes of its traditional heartlands and has suffered its worst performance since before the Second World War. Mr Johnson says he will get Brexit done by the end of January next year. There's some flash photography in Jessica Parker's report.
He knows it. The Conservatives have won a decisive majority, earlier at his constituency count and later to a rally.
And with this mandate and this majority, we will at last be able to do what? You've been paying attention. Because this election means that getting Brexit done is now the irrefutable, irresistible, unarguable decision of the British people.
They're delighted, the Tories making those inroads into Labour heartlands that voted leave.
I would like to thank Boris because I would say that I'm going to be on that train on Monday. I'm going to London. We're going to get Brexit done.
For his party, a major defeat. Jeremy Corbyn acknowledged a disappointing result.
I want to also make it clear that I will not lead the party in any future general election campaign. I will discuss with our party to ensure there is a process now of reflection on this result.
Glum faces here. Bolsover, Burnley, Sedgefield, Stoke and Don Valley among Labour's losses.
There was two fronts I was fighting on. One front was the fact that so many of my voters could not and did not want to support Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister. But the second front was the Labour Party's position on Brexit, that we'd moved to a position of being more like a Stop Brexit, Remain party.
Have you lost your seat, Miss Swinson?
And a huge blow for the Lib Dems. Jo Swinson's lost her seat and will no longer lead the party.
For millions of people in our country, these results will bring dread and dismay, and people are looking for hope.
Earlier at Conservative headquarters, they were in the party mood. Boris Johnson wanted to drive his agenda through, and the door is now open. Jessica Parker, BBC News.
Well, Donald Trump has congratulated Boris Johnson on his great win, as he put it. In a tweet, the US president also said Britain and the United States will now be free to strike a massive new trade deal after Brexit. This deal has the potential to be far bigger and more lucrative than any deal that could be made with the EU. Celebrate Boris, is what he said. Police and the military in New Zealand have airlifted 6 bodies from White Island in the Bay of Plenty, where a volcano erupted on Monday, killing 16 people. A mission is ongoing to recover 2 more bodies which have to be found. The volcano erupted on Monday with 47 people there. 8 people were missing on the island, presumed dead. Another 8 have already been confirmed dead. Around 20 remain in intensive care with severe burns. Right, let's get some of the day's other news as well. The US House Judiciary Committee has adjourned a marathon hearing in Washington without voting on 2 articles of impeachment against President Trump. The acrimonious meeting of the committee ran late into the night, and Chairman Jerry Nadler said in closing the session that members should search their consciences before the committee meets again on Friday. President Trump has reportedly approved a trade deal in principle with China. Under the agreement, the US would suspend tariffs on $160 billion of Chinese goods, those tariffs that were due to come into effect on Sunday. In return, China promises to buy more agricultural products from the US, but there's been no official statement yet, and there's no written agreements. There is, of course, lots more from BBC News online and on your mobile, where you can look up the results in your constituency for the general election. You can use our interactive map to search for any seat across the UK on our website, or use the BBC News app. We'll be back with Hugh in a moment. First, though, the weather with Matt Taylor.
Thank you very much, Louise. Very good morning too. Well, a few of you will stay dry and reasonably sunny today, but elsewhere, grab the umbrella once again. At the moment, most persistent rain is across parts of eastern Scotland and pretty wet too through Northern Ireland, parts of Wales, northwest England through towards East Anglia and the southeast. That zone will start to see the cloud break up a little bit through the day, so a few brighter spells, but showers continue, staying wet in the northeast of Scotland throughout. But southern Scotland, northeast England, some of the driest places to be, and across southern counties there'll be some sunshine too. But here, the windiest place, we've seen winds gust 60, 70 miles an hour through the night. Gales, maybe severe gales, continue throughout today. Temperatures, though, up to around 9 or 10 degrees here, still in mid-single figures further north that you are. Now, as you go through into tonight, outbreaks of rain are going to continue across some areas. Bit of sun, a bit of clear skies in between, leading to a touch of frost. And it stays cold and blustery this weekend. Now back to Hugh with Election 2019.
It is 6 minutes past 8. Welcome back to the BBC's Election Centre. And if you're just joining us this morning, if you're just waking up and you're catching up with the news, well, the news is that Boris Johnson has achieved a remarkable win in this general election. There are just 2 results to come in. We've had 648 so far. And at the end of all of this marathon of results, there we are, 363 to Boris Johnson and 203 to Jeremy Corbyn. And when the results are all in, we are expecting Mr Johnson to have a majority of 80 in the new House of Commons, a very different picture to the hung parliament that ended several weeks ago. This is going to be a Conservative majority, and the majority big enough for Mr Johnson to do pretty much what he likes in legislative terms. He's already said this morning he'll press ahead with Brexit, and he'll press ahead with some ambitious infrastructure and other projects. So we've heard from him earlier. We saw clips there in the news bulletin with Louise. So what I'd like to do now, especially for the benefit of those just joining us, is to recap really on some of the notable gains for the Conservatives overnight, because there have been many of them, and lots of them in traditional Labour areas, especially Labour areas where there was a big Leave vote back in 2016. So that's where the Conservatives really have made a lot of gains and made some rather spectacular results in areas which have never been Conservative before. So with all of that in mind, let's ask Reeta in our results centre to take us through some of those gains. Reeta?
Hugh, there have indeed been some staggering results in a whole host of seats. We're showing just a few of them here on the touch screen. Names like Sedgefield. Sedgefield was Tony Blair's old seat. He had a majority of 25,000 there once. Labour has it no more. It's now a Conservative seat. Great Grimsby. This has been Labour since the war. It was the seat of Austin Mitchell, of Tony Crossland before him. It's now become Conservative. And let me just show you some of the figures there. So the new Conservative MP for Great Grimsby is Leah Nietzsche. She's won that seat on a 55% share of the vote overnight. Look what happened to the Labour vote, plummeting down through the floor, minus 17 points. And the Conservatives up 13, Brexit Party 2 up 7. And show you the swing there. That's a swing from Labour to Conservative of 15 points. That's a massive swing, and we have seen that sort of swing in several seats. Let me take you back to the list of Conservative gains. They've gained West Bromwich East, that's Tom Watson's old seat. They've gained Durham North West, so they've unseated Laura Pidcock. She was a rising star in the Labour Party. Some had thought that she might even be the one to succeed Tom Watson as the deputy leader. Well, she's out, and that is now a Conservative seat. Ashfield, that was Gloria De Piero's seat. The Labour MP, Gloria De Piero, was standing down, and her former office manager defected to the Conservatives, stood for that seat, and it's now his seat. In Bolsover, Dennis Skinner, who'd been an MP there for decades and decades, he has been unseated, and Bolsover has now become Conservative. Add to those names Derby North, where Chris Williamson, who had been expelled from Labour because of anti-Semitism accusations, well, he has been unseated too. That is Conservative. And Stoke-on-Trent Central, now a Conservative seat. Now, what is interesting looking at the figures is that the analysis shows that based on the turnover, which is around 67%, 48% of them voted for Brexit-supporting parties. And I think that is a point that we will hear repeated in the weeks and months to come from opponents of Brexit, that it was 48%, less than half of the turnout, who voted for Brexit-supporting parties.
Reeta, thank you very much again for taking us through those Conservative gains, at least some of them, just to underline the scale of the change that's happened overnight. What's the response then in Brussels to all of this? Because we've heard the Prime Minister say he's going to push on now with the Brexit process, get it done, as he says, repeatedly. Well, this is Charles Michel, who's the EU Council President. I'd like to congratulate Boris Johnson on his victory. We expect a vote, he says, on the withdrawal agreement as soon as possible. The EU is ready for the next phase. We will negotiate a future trade deal which ensures a true level playing field. Well, there's several messages within those sentences, Andrew, I think, aren't there?
A true level playing field. And that is going to be Boris Johnson's greatest kind of dilemma over the next year going ahead, because the more he wants to diverge from EU standards and tax rates and practices, the more they will demand in return. And it'll be a series of payoffs, one after another. And the question is, does he diverge and risk a car company here or parts of the fishing industry there, whatever? It's all payoffs. Okay. And he is saying, you don't diverge if you want to have a clear trading arrangement.
Let's pop over to Downing Street, and Ben Wright, my colleague, is there. Ben, we've heard from the Prime Minister, obviously this morning at that rally at the Queen Elizabeth Centre, not far away from Number 10. What do you make of the state of play this morning, not least given the fact that Boris Johnson has now set out quite a lot of the programme that he wants to press on with?
And he needs to, because, you know, through this election, the actual offer from the Conservative Party beyond getting Brexit done by the end of January next year was rather thin, actually. I mean, it was a pretty sparse manifesto, 59 pages, sketching out a few promises around hospitals and nurses, talking sort of in broad generalities of the sort of country that the Tories wanted to see, but lacking specifics. And that was entirely deliberate. I mean, this was a stripped-back manifesto wanting to avoid anything that would hold Boris Johnson hostage, wanted to keep it entirely focused on the central Brexit message. So he's got quite a job to do now, I think, fleshing out a sort of programme for government and giving everybody a sense of what his priorities are going to be beyond getting Britain out of the EU at the end of January. But picking up on what Andrew said, I think that's completely right. All the way through the campaign, Boris Johnson was asked again and again, what sort of trade-offs might you do in the next stage of the Brexit negotiation? How close do you want alignment? Would you rule out leaving at the end of the transition without any deal? And these are questions that he ducked again and again. And now the election's over, he's going to have to provide some answers.
Well, we saw that the Prime Minister arrived there a short while ago, Ben, and I'm just wondering, are you expecting to see him again in Downing Street to make some kind of statement later? Will there be a visit to the palace, or what's the arrangement there?
We're not sure, Hugh. I don't get a sense there's going to be a Downing Street statement, but there may be later in the day after Mr Johnson has had some rest and regrouped. We don't know yet about going to the palace. At the moment, I think he's just gathering himself together, absorbing these final results and working out, the sort of tone that he's going to take over the next few days. Because, this has been so divisive. There are going to be a huge number of people who are still clinging on in the hope there might somehow be a hung parliament or another referendum. Is Boris Johnson going to speak to them and try and bridge the sort of divisions and animosity that runs through the electorate at the moment? I think he'll be thinking about all of that, but he will be revelling in this. I mean, this is an absolute triumph for him. Biggest majority for 30 years. And considering too, we've spent a lot of time, certainly in the first half of this year, reporting from Downing Street on the total chaos within the government. It felt like a Tory party collapsing at some points, particularly when Theresa May was trying to get the deal through. Huge rebellions on her own backbenchers, moderate sort of centrist Tories being kicked out, all sorts of talk that this could be a repeat of the Corn Laws split of the 19th century. And yet here they are at the end of the year with a thumping majority.
There'll need to be some kind of reshuffle, won't there, Ben? Because, I know people were saying that the big reshuffle might not be until after Christmas. But, for example, Zach Goldsmith obviously will need to be replaced because he's out. And Nicky Morgan, who's retired. There's still no officially Secretary of State for Wales, though Alan Cairns did retain his seat in the Vale of Glamorgan. So there are jobs to be filled right away.
There certainly are, although remember this is a relatively new team cast in Boris Johnson's own image that he put in place when he first entered Downing Street in the summer. And it's been hard to tell actually during the course of the campaign who he favours and who he doesn't. People like Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, have been very visible, so I think he's probably quite confident of either staying in his job or moving on to an even bigger one in Whitehall. But what was interesting about the campaign is that it was so focused on Mr Johnson. The vast majority of the cabinet really weren't seen very much at all, including people like the Chancellor. So we'll see if Mr Johnson uses this new mandate, uses the, 5-year term that he can now look forward to with confidence to rebuild his team at this early stage.
Ben, thanks very much. Ben Wright for us there and in Downing Street. Well, down at Westminster, my colleague Emily Maitlis is there and she'll be taking us through lots of the day to come with plenty to talk about. Emily, very good morning to you. What's going on?
Morning, Hugh. Yes, at 9 o'clock, all the election coverage will move here right to the heart of Westminster and our election studio, where you can carry on with much of the analysis and reaction to what will still be a breaking story for the rest of the day. But right now, we're joined by the Conservative Party chairman, James Cleverly. James, were you expecting anything of this size?
Well, we do polling and we do modelling, just like the stuff that gets put in the public domain. And we campaign hard and we hope. But I don't think anyone was really expecting the result to be quite this way, although we were picking up hints. So I was visiting dozens of constituencies in the Midlands and the North, and there was real anger about Labour.
We heard jitters yesterday, is that right? There were real jitters on the day.
I think it's only human to get nervous. There was so much at stake. We were very, very keen that this was a really important election. We made that clear. And you always get a little bit nervous at the 11th hour. But our activists, our candidates put in a huge amount of work, as did the team at CCHQ that I look after. And in the end, we got a result which I think really vindicated the message we were putting across, was that the British people wanted Brexit done, wanted it resolved.
Let's work out what that plan is now.
Sure.
Where does it go from here? What's the week ahead look like?
Well, we get straight to work. I mean, this is going to be a very busy prelude to Christmas. Obviously, a whole load of new MPs will come down to Westminster, loads of new MPs, and get sworn in. That takes time. But very quickly, next week, we'll be starting the process to get the withdrawal agreement bill through the House.
So that will go ahead. The withdrawal bill will go through next week. Is that what you're saying?
We're going to start the process. It can't go through all in the first week, but we will start the process and make sure that all the legislative stages are done in time for us to leave on the 31st of January.
So just explain, in terms of what happens now before Christmas, will it go through the Commons, go through the Lords?
Well, we're not completely... I can't give cast iron guarantees of the precise timetable.
But there was an urgency, wasn't there, to the Prime Minister when we heard him an hour ago. So I'm assuming...
We will present this at the first opportunity. As soon as the members of Parliament are sworn in, we'll get the Queen's speech through, and then...
On the 19th still.
Yeah, and then straight into getting the withdrawal agreement bill through the House of Commons so we can get through in good time and we can leave by the 31st.
You expecting to be working on Saturday?
Quite possibly.
Right.
Quite possibly.
So,
look, we
so
don't know for sure.
it could be a full 6-day week right up until the end now.
Well,
to get these
I
bits
don't
done.
know for definite, and it depends on how quickly we can get things done. But the Prime Minister is absolutely clear. We made a commitment. We will honour that commitment because Parliament, government, has got to get back into the habit of listening to and responding to the voice of the British people.
So we know that there's a plan. We don't know yet what this Brexit looks like. It may be radically altered as a result of where geographically you've won last night. You are now the party of Kensington and Workington. They might have very different perceptions of what a good Brexit deal looks like or what they want. Are you shifting your perception of what that Brexit is now?
Well, the Prime Minister, back when he was running for the leadership of the party, made it clear it wasn't about separating and dividing, it was about unifying. That was one of his big messages. And actually, I'm really pleased that we got electoral support in places like, Workington and Redcar, as well as places like Wimbledon and Kensington.
But what does that do to the shape of Brexit? Does that mean that we have to be more aligned with Europe now because you're going to be more worried about manufacturing heartlands? Does it mean that it's going to still follow broadly a Canada Plus and break the alignment?
What this is about is through all these negotiations is being aware that the government works on behalf of the whole of the UK. Now that might present us with some challenges, but as we've seen, the Prime Minister is well capable of embracing challenges, as he did when he reopened the withdrawal agreement and took out the backstop. So it is going to be a Brexit that works for every part of the UK, rather than, as I think Labour's trying to do, separate one against the other.
You talk about every part of the UK. There have been 2 elections overnight. There's been what happened in England and Wales, indeed Northern Ireland, and there's been Scotland, a totally different story there, which you don't control. You cannot control the narrative now of Scotland's independence and the SNP.
Well, the people of Scotland voted in 2014 in what was billed as a once-in-a-generation referendum. And the SNP are very keen to talk about the referendum. They talk about
They might
Scottish
do more than talk
independence.
about it. They might press on whatever you say.
The point that I would make, and certainly when I visited Scotland, the message came across loud and clear, is a lot of people in Scotland would much rather the SNP government focus on things they already control, like the NHS, like education, both of which are slipping backwards in Scotland, rather than trying to distract people by talking once again about
James,
a Scottish
just before
referendum.
you go, the last time we talked was after the first debate and the fact check had been changed on Twitter.
I think I remember.
I'm just wondering, when you reflect back now on the form, the style, the feel of this campaign, yes, you've won, and yes, it was victorious. Are you proud of the way in which it happened?
Well, on that particular issue, I really do not believe that the results that we've been seeing overnight were significantly influenced by changing the masthead on a Twitter feed.
Or on editing videos, or on not letting your Prime Minister talk to the press and running into the fridge.
This result, I think, was twofold, and both to do with trust, I think. The first is that the Labour Party promised in 2017 they would deliver Brexit and spent the next 2.5 years not doing so, and people felt that and were angry about that. And also, the other really big lie was that the Labour Party suggesting that a Conservative government would sell off the NHS. And when I spoke to people from the bottom of Cornwall to the top of the country, they just didn't buy that. They knew that that was not true. And I think this result is a reflection of those two issues.
James Cleverly, thank you very much indeed. And we'll be hearing the Labour side of the story from Ian Lavery shortly, but right now it's back to Hugh in our BBC studios there. Hi, Hugh.
Emily, many thanks. And yes, indeed, it's 8:23. We've been talking about the changing landscape, the changing map of the UK. It's looking very different. The colours have moved around. And right at the start of the night, we were talking to Sophie, who's just outside the building here, on that great big map. And she was explaining how the tiles were moving around. Let's join Sophie again to see where they now settle.
Well, we have just one more tile to lay, and that is St Ives in Cornwall. It always takes a long time because of the votes coming in from the silly hours. But things have changed dramatically across a lot of the UK, not so much across the south of England. This is London. I'm walking around the edges of it here because it really, all these 73 MPs really distort our map, but still very much dominated by Labour MPs. But if I show you the map as it was last night when we started, the 2017 election colours on the right of your screen, and the election results now, the 2019 election results, you can see just how dramatically things have changed in the north of England, northeast Wales, right across Scotland. And it is that Labour red wall that has not so much been breached completely, but there are certainly huge cracks in it, and it has been shrunk dramatically. And there is a big Conservative path above it, right across from one coast to the other of England. And the story really started up here in northeast Wales in seats like Wrexham that have been held by Labour since 1935 and have gone Conservative for the first time. They voted very heavily to leave the EU. There are other seats here like the blue heart in the red circle. That's Tom Watson, the former deputy leader of the Labour Party. That's his West Bromwich East seat. And big surprises here, Lee in Greater Manchester. There was a 9,500 Labour majority, which was overturned by the Conservatives, who took that for the first time. And this is something I couldn't do last night. Walk right across northwest England, northeast England, along Conservative seats. Big surprises here. Well, Wakefield, that had been held since 1932. That was taken by the Conservatives as well. And of course, the story in Scotland, it has gone almost completely yellow again as the SNP have taken all these seats, and some of the big casualties of the night. Jo Swinson, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, who lost her Dunbartonshire East seat, a disastrous night for her. And if we go back down into Derbyshire, there's Dennis Skinner, the beast of Bolsover. He had been an MP, a Labour MP, there since 1970. His seat now Conservative. Further down, the seat of Beaconsfield, the former Attorney General Dominic Grieve, who led the backbench rebellion against Brexit, was kicked out of the Conservative Party. He stood as an independent, but he has lost his seat. It has gone and stayed with the Conservatives. And finally, the Conservative there, Zach Goldsmith, has lost his seat, Richmond Park, to the Liberal Democrats. But our map showing you very clearly now, particularly here across northern England, that Labour wall that was so solid last night, and now really all these cracks, all these holes, and it has been shrunk so dramatically as the Conservatives eat into the Labour heartlands.
Sophie, just a thought, because you've been there for hours, and I'm just wondering, as you've seen the patterns changing, what for you was the significant point of the evening when you saw the pattern? Was it the red wall showing those cracks, or another part of the UK? What was the moment for you when you realised we were looking at significant change?
It was seats like Wrexham. It was North East Wales. This area here was very much dominated by red tiles when we came on air last night, and the colours of the 2017 general election, they're all blue now. And then it was the surprises like Lee. And it is just the way this wall has shrunk, the holes that have opened up, the blue holes, the way that the Conservatives have just narrowed that Labour dominance in these heartlands and just squeezed them so dramatically. As I say, the south of England, really largely unchanged. And again, Scotland going almost completely yellow. We saw that in 2015. It has happened again. And it is just here, this part of the United Kingdom, where we've seen such big changes.
Sophie, thanks very much again. Sophie there with the changing map for us and illustrating that in such a vivid way. But mentioning there the Labour red wall and the fact that it's full of cracks after the evening's events, after the night's events. So let's join Ian Watson, my colleague who's at Labour headquarters. And Ian, what are you picking up there in terms of the reaction from within the party to what's going on? We heard from John Lansman during the night, the Momentum chair, and we've heard, of course, from other Labour figures too, representing different traditions within the party. What are they saying to you this morning?
Yes, well, it's quite a contrast, actually, Hugh, with the very public statements made by Boris Johnson that Jeremy Corbyn came in through the back door here at Labour headquarters. He left by the front door, not saying very much under the cover of darkness, but quite a lot has been said off the record and behind the scenes. First of all, that it was a body blow to people around Jeremy Corbyn that Laura Pidcock lost her seat in Durham overnight, because it had been the hope of some people around him that her, the new generation in her 30s, might be able to be the new standard bearer for the left wing in the party and become his successor. And one of the reasons that he's calling for this process of reflection and showing no signs of leaving swiftly after the worst defeat since Michael Foot in 1983 is that, in part, people around him are now trying to regroup and think who else they can build up from that wing of the party as a potential leadership candidate, possibly, as she's been talked about for some time, Rebecca Long-Bailey. But there had been talk of Laura Pidcock going for deputy leader of the party when Tom Watson said he was standing down. As I understand it, actually, they wanted her now to go for the leadership itself, and that was blown out the water by this terrible result. Now, what we're also going to be seeing during the course of the day, Hugh, is quite simply this. We're going to get the battle of the narratives, if you like. People close to leadership, you'll hear this from Ian Lavery saying it's all down to Brexit. People who want to replace Jeremy Corbyn and start to move the party further away from the left will be arguing that Jeremy Corbyn's leadership was not just central to it, not just him and his personality, but the politics as well, and that has to change too. What I'm hearing on that front is that people think this idea of a long process of reflection will simply be unsustainable. The way of making it unsustainable is to try to parade a range of defeated candidates during the course of the day to try to change that story. If you like, he or she who controls the past controls the future. There's also going to be pressure from people in local government as well. They say they don't want Jeremy Corbyn to stay on anywhere near the May local elections in case another wipeout is on the cards too. People close to Jeremy Corbyn would like him to stay on a bit longer. I'm told again by sources inside here that it's most likely, if he can, that he would wish to stay on for a few months more. But I think that position is going to come under sustained pressure. That would be the first thing, and then at that stage, some people who'd move the party perhaps in a different direction, then coming out and throwing their hats in the ring, people such as Sir Keir Starmer and Jess Phillips.
Ian, thanks very much for the latest thoughts there at Labour headquarters. Ian Watson there for us, getting the latest reaction and thoughts from within the Labour Party. So, the time is 8:32 and we are now in a position where we just have one result to go. Let's have a look at the seats gained by Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn at this stage, with just one seat to declare, that is St Ives, and Boris Johnson on 364, Labour on 203. Boris Johnson looking at a majority of 80 seats in this new Parliament. You're watching Election 2019.
News, and the Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he will work night and day to repay the trust of voters after the Conservatives were confirmed as the winners of the general election by a large majority. The Labour Party has lost swathes of its traditional heartlands and has suffered its worst performance since before the Second World War. Mr Johnson says he will get Brexit done by the end of January. There's some flash photography in Jessica Parker's reports.
He knows it. The Conservatives have won a decisive majority, earlier at his constituency count and later to a rally.
And with this mandate and this majority, we will at last be able to do what? You've been paying attention. Because this election means that getting Brexit done is now the irrefutable, irresistible, unarguable decision of the British people.
They're delighted, the Tories making those inroads into Labour heartlands that voted leave.
I would like to thank Boris, because I would say that I'm going to be on that train on Monday. I'm going to London. We're going to get Brexit done.
For his party, a major defeat. Jeremy Corbyn acknowledged a disappointing result.
I want to also make it clear that I will not lead the party in any future general election campaign. I will discuss with our party to ensure there is a process now of reflection on this result.
Glum faces here. Bolsover, Burnley, Sedgefield, Stoke and Don Valley among Labour's losses.
There was two fronts I was fighting on. One front was the fact that so many of my voters could not and did not want to support Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister. But the second front was the Labour Party's position on Brexit, that we'd moved to a position of being more like a Stop Brexit Remain party.
Have you lost your seat, Miss Swinson?
And a huge blow for the Lib Dems. Jo Swinson's lost her seat and will no longer lead the party.
For millions of people in our country, these results will bring dread and dismay, and people are looking for hope.
Earlier at Conservative headquarters, they were in the party mood. Boris Johnson wanted to drive his agenda through, and the door is now open. Jessica Parker, BBC News.
Well, as we saw there, the SNP took Jo Swinson's seat. They've won 49 out of 59 constituencies in Scotland. Nicola Sturgeon's party backed a second referendum on EU membership during their campaign. The SNP also ran on securing a new vote on Scottish independence from the UK, something which they will push for in the coming Parliament.
You know, I don't pretend that every single person that voted SNP yesterday will necessarily support independence, but there has been a strong endorsement in this election of Scotland having a choice over our future, of not having to put up with a Conservative government that we didn't vote for and not having to accept life as a nation outside the European Union. So that independence referendum that was very much at the heart of the SNP's campaign, there is a renewed, refreshed, strengthened mandate for that.
In Northern Ireland, nationalist MPs outnumber unionists for the first time. The Democratic Unionist Party suffered significant defeats. The DUP's deputy leader, Nigel Dodds, lost his seat to the Sinn Féin candidate, John Finucane. The DUP also lost South Belfast. The nationalist SDLP won a landslide there and also in Foyle, meaning it returns to Parliament after losing all its seats last time. All 40 seats in Wales have now been declared and the Conservatives have made significant gains. They took 6 seats from Labour, including Bridgend in the south and 4 in the northeast, Wrexham, Delyn, the Vale of Clwyd and Clwyd South. Plaid Cymru held on to all 4 of their seats. Donald Trump has congratulated Boris Johnson on his great win, as he put it. In a tweet, the US president also said Britain and the United States will now be free to strike a massive new trade deal after Brexit. There is more, of course, from BBC News Online and on your mobile, where you can look up the results in your constituency. Right now, let's take you back to Hugh.
Very good morning once again. We're at the BBC Election Centre, where we've been since 5 to 10 last night, but we're still fizzing with energy, all of us in the studio. It's 8:37 in the morning, and what I'd like to do now is to ask Jeremy Vine to look through the results for us and to put them into the House of Commons so that we know what it'll look like when it gathers again in a few days' time.
Oh, it's so dramatically different, Hugh. Let's take a look. It's funny, isn't it? We've been so used to hung parliaments and thin majorities and coalition governments and so on. The idea that the Commons is always very, very tight, that we're not used to this, which is the decisive win for a single party. It's the Conservatives who we have on 364. They may yet go up a seat, by the way, because of the slow count in St Ives. But 364 we have them on. Just a reminder, 326 is the minimum number you need for an overall majority. They've gone through it. And how? They've humbled the opposition. This is a terrible result on the other side for Labour. Let's just bring on their seats. It looked for a while through the night as if Labour might not even reach 200. They've done that, 203, but they haven't even reached 209, which was Michael Foot in 1983, widely regarded as the biggest disaster in modern times for Labour. This is worse. It's terrible for them. It means they're going to feel powerless in the new House of Commons. Not the case, though, for the SNP in Scotland. They've done brilliantly. They're almost back to their strongest with 48 seats. They will be a real presence in this chamber when it reconvenes. Lib Dems have had a bad night. More votes, fewer seats, and they lost their leader. 2 seats down. 11 is a bit of a crisis for them. DUP in Northern Ireland have been reversed as well. 2 seats down. Sinn Féin, as they were, lost 1, gained 1 on 7. Northern Ireland again. Let's see the next seats if we can here. Plaid Cymru on 4 in Wales. SDLP in Northern Ireland on 2. And just moving on, you've got the Alliance Party in Northern Ireland on 1 there. So quite a bit of reconfiguring in Northern Ireland here. And 1 Green, Caroline Lucas back in Brighton. So yes, some changes in the Northern Ireland terrain. Scotland, obviously, hugely powerful SNP performance and real questions for where the Labour Party goes after Jeremy Corbyn. But here we are with this situation where the Conservatives took this gamble under Boris Johnson. Could he do what Theresa May failed to do 2 years ago? Yes, he could. And how? 78-seat majority. Worth pointing out as well that as far as Labour's performance is concerned, they've only got 1 seat in Scotland and have fallen below 20% of the vote there. So this is remarkable, and it's made for a very dramatic night. Hugh.
Remarkable indeed, Jeremy. Thanks very much. And Jeremy, they're taking us through the look of the new House of Commons, so dramatically different to the last one. And that's, of course, principally because of the huge Labour losses overnight, and most of those going to the Conservatives. So with that in mind, let's join Emily once again down at Westminster.
Hugh, thanks very much. Yes, we're going to join Ian Lavery, the Labour chair right now in Newcastle. Ian Lavery, why isn't Jeremy Corbyn going straight away? Do you understand that?
Well, I think the situation with the election, I mean, it's only more or less happened in the last 10 hours or so, and what Jeremy said within a matter of hours is that he'll not be standing as the leader of the Labour Party at the next election. And what he said was we need a period of reflection and we need to look at exactly what's happened. We're going to have a post-mortem with regard to the disastrous results. I mean, it's quite right. It's so disappointing what's happened, bearing in mind the fantastic manifesto we've had, the way that people have embraced probably what's been the best document the Labour Party's ever produced. So we'll be discussing it, but we'll let the dust settle and we'll look at how we go forward as a party in the next few days or so.
Just explain that, what the reflection is, because after Ed Miliband's defeat, he said, I take absolute and total responsibility for our defeat. And we haven't heard that from Labour. We've heard different excuses or rationales. Do you think there is any acceptance of responsibility in the Labour leadership? The Labour leadership will be having... It's only 10 hours or so since the election results were began at 10 o'clock last night, and even it's only a few hours ago. It's only,
gone wrong, by the way, it seems like 10 days, by the way, because I haven't had any sleep. But the reality is that we will be discussing everything in order, as a Democratic Party you would expect to do, and we'll have a look at what happened last night. We'll have a look at what needs to be done. We'll put a plan forward and we'll discuss it with all the stakeholders, including the membership. We are a democratic organisation and we'll take the party forward on that basis.
Ian, let me just ask you on a personal level, do you accept that Jeremy Corbyn, his personality and his policies were the roadblock here? Well, listen, I've visited many constituencies in the past 5 weeks. I've visited probably 50, 60 constituencies, knocked on doors, spoke to people, and the issue on the doorstep basically wasn't even Brexit, although this has proved to be a rerun of the 2016 referendum. Undoubtedly, that's what's happened here. But I spoke to people, and you know what? People were more interested in the National Health Service, they were more interested in education, they were more interested in standard of living. So are you saying that Labour couldn't deliver on that on the doorstep either? I mean, we are where we are with the results now, so something has gone wrong, and I'm asking you whether you think that this was as a result of Jeremy Corbyn. Was he the roadblock, or was it that you chose the wrong things to emphasise? If you have a look at the 2017 manifesto, a radical manifesto, if you have a look at the fact that Jeremy was a leader of the party in 2017, we had the biggest swing in votes in 2017 since we had since 1945. Maybe that was because your MPs had signed off on Article 50, which secured Brexit. In 2017, we said we would accept the result of and respect the result of the 2016 referendum. Here in 2019, no, hang on, 2019, we've seen that we've got the same sort of radical manifesto. We've got Jeremy Corbyn as the leader. The only difference is that we now accept and we've published the fact that we want a second referendum. That's the only difference. And the fact that we've went for a second referendum is the real issue within the Labour Party. It's about a lack of trust. People feel disengaged. People feel let down. So in terms of ideology, then direction, nothing has changed. Ian Lavery, thank you very much for your time this morning, and we'll be back at 9 when the election coverage continues here with plenty of analysis and developing moments throughout the day.
We'll be back with you then, Emily. Thanks very much, Emily, there down at Westminster. It is 8:45, so we will be ending this segment of our coverage at 9 o'clock, as Emily was saying. And what I'd really like to do now is to just say a very big thank you and offer congratulations to this gentleman, Professor Sir John Curtice, and of course his team. He's already been generously paying tribute to them. But John, on the exit poll and on the outcome, absolutely on the nail again. So many congratulations from all of us, the hard work you've put in and for getting it right once again. Are you thinking at this point that this is the kind of transformed landscape that we were expecting maybe 24 hours ago?
Oh, yes. I mean, the truth is this is precisely the kind of outcome
to which most of the opinion polls were pointing. I mean, on average, they had double-digit leads throughout this campaign, and in the event, we ended up with a 12-point Conservative lead. They were also showing that the Conservatives were stronger amongst Leave voters than they had been in 2017, and a lot much stronger amongst Leave voters than they had been in 2015. And that conversely, they were losing ground amongst Remain voters. And that gets clearly reflected in the geography of this result. The Conservative vote actually fell back on average in the most pro-Remain parts of the country, but conversely rose by 6 points or so as compared with 2 years ago amongst the most pro-Leave. So the truth is, it was all there. The evidence was there in the polling, both in terms of the broad level of support for the party, the lead it had over Labour, and the fact that it was going to be very clearly reflected in people's views about Brexit. Of course, what was inevitably true during the election campaign was that we were constantly emphasising the potential down risk to the Conservative Party, because in a sense we knew that it didn't really matter whether the Conservatives got 350, 360 or 370 votes. That meant that Brexit would happen. But if the Conservative vote were to fall, if the lead were to fall, then it could result in a different outcome for Brexit. So apologies for the fact that probably a lot of the commentary focused disproportionately on the potential downside risks that in the end were not realised. But that reflected the fact that it was whether or not those downside risks were going to be realised that was going to be crucial to the outcome of the election. Well, we discovered in the end, basically, we'd have just taken the polls at what they said. Indeed, the polls at the very beginning of this election campaign said it was a 10-point Tory lead. There really wasn't, in the end of the day, any significant change in that position. And this is probably going to go down as one of those elections where, in the end, the campaign did not make much of a difference, in stark contrast to its predecessor 2 years ago.
John, congratulations once again, and good to work with you as ever. So John Curtice there and his team on the election analysis. Andrew, just thoughts at the end of this sequence of the programme now, and something you touched upon earlier, but I was going to ask you again. The kind of role that social media has played as well in this campaign, because, you know, we've reflected it now and again. But what's your thought today on that?
I think it's incumbent on all of us to think about what we got wrong, what we need to listen to harder in the future. And of course, Sir John is one of the people we all need to listen to hard all the time. I hope somebody can give him another knighthood, so he's Sir John in the future. But beyond that, I was really struck over the last few days, hovering over social media and Twitter and Facebook and so on, how well Labour seemed to be doing. You know, their propaganda was funnier, brighter, younger, more passionate, more full of exuberance than what the Conservatives were putting out. And yet, the old-fashioned, dreary, stodgy, old media and the mood in the country was completely different. And I think it's more or less unconstitutional now to finish these conversations without quoting the Prime Minister's dishevelled Svengali, Dominic Cummings. And he said this morning, he said, MPs need to reflect, the media needs to reflect, and they need to realise that the conversations they have in London are a million miles away from reality. And I think, in a sense, this is another lesson of this election. It's the latest stage in what has been a long-standing and repeated provincial revolt against the metropolis and metropolitan values.
Fascinating thought, Andrew. Thank you very much for being with us. And Vicky, your thoughts as we head into a day of coverage again, and you and I will be working together later today. What are you going to be looking for in terms of the reactions today and the signals from Downing Street? What for you is going to be the best pointers to the way forward?
I mean, it's about obviously getting ready for majority government, which none of us are used to. It's which Boris Johnson turns up and wants to govern, and the change in the Conservative Party in Parliament. The fact that now MPs representing areas they've never represented before as Conservatives, will that change the policies that they bring in? And of course, the big thing, take a step back, we will be leaving the EU almost certainly at the end of January. As for Labour, I think the blame game is well underway. Some Tory MPs have been, Labour MPs have been defeated, talking about the Labour Party maybe not having a right to exist. And that battle is going to be absolutely huge.
Vicky, to you as well, our thanks. And I'd like to go to Jeremy as well. Jeremy, thank you very much for all of the illustrations overnight, all of the energy and all of the analysis. What was the night's moment for you, and what do you make of the pattern that we've ended up with?
you know, I would go right back to 11:32. When we get the brilliant John Curtice's exit poll, we always have that sliver of fear, don't we? Is this going to be the actual result? And then Hugh, Blythe Valley came in, and that's an 8,000 majority. And at 11:32, we discovered that had gone blue, and everything rolled from there, didn't it? So there was that, and I was trying to think, is there any crumb of comfort for Labour in the whole night? And the only crumb of comfort I can think of is that they took Putney. Now, I mean, that is in its own way a sign of how bad it is for Labour. One further thought, actually, is that the next Speaker of the House of Commons, Lindsay Hoyle, isn't going to be very famous, which will change things as well. We're not going to have night after night of action in Parliament. But, you know, what a night, and a different kind of result from our extraordinary democratic system.
Jeremy, our thanks to you once again, and to your team, Jeremy Vine there. And of course, once again, let's fly over the newsroom in New Broadcasting House. Let's go straight over to our results centre. And Reeta's back at the touchscreen. A final thought, Reeta, for you and your moment of the night, I suppose.
Well, there were several moments of the night, just building really on what Jeremy was saying. I think it was seeing all those red seats, those traditionally red seats, turn blue. Names like Sedgefield, Tony Blair's old seat, Great Grimsby, seats like Bassett Law, where you saw an 18% swing from Labour to the Conservatives. You saw the Labour vote drop by 25 percentage points. These were really very startling. So it was a whole host of names. And I think we shouldn't also forget the fact that the Liberal Democrats had a really quite miserable night, and seeing East Dunbartonshire being lost by Joe Swinson, well, that was certainly quite a moment.
Reeta, thanks very much. And I should say again that there is an army of people, not just here at Broadcasting House, but up and down the country, who've helped this broadcast. Our thanks to everyone in the BBC team over the last 11 hours or so. A remarkable night, and now a Conservative majority government. Thanks for watching, and goodbye. A very good evening. For the fourth time in the space of 5 years, the future of the United Kingdom is uncertain.
The question tonight is whether any party can get 326 seats or more and send their leader through that door.
Who will declare first? Last time it was Newcastle, but we have found out that their neighbours in Blythe Valley have been practising in secret. Are you ready? Yeah!
Our exit poll is suggesting that there will be a Conservative majority. It is a dramatic poll.
Boris Johnson, who just a year ago was on the backbenches, may just have redrawn the map.
The exit poll has Boris Johnson going straight through the 326.
If this poll is anywhere near right, you've produced your worst result since 1935.
Yeah, if it is anywhere near right, that's right.
If this exit poll is correct, we are looking at the best result for the Conservatives since Margaret Thatcher in 1987.
Another general election, another failure to win a single seat.
Yeah, but we've used our influence, and that's the important thing.
This so-called safe Labour seat may not be.
17,000.
The thought of Blythe Valley going Tory, well, unfortunately, I have to talk to you, Hugh, or my jaw would be on the floor.
In the north of England, in Leave areas, in working class seats, the Labour Party does seem to be in serious trouble.
This could build a new Conservative majority across Britain for another generation.
We're on the cusp of something historic.
Although the votes have not yet been fully counted in your constituency, you think you've lost?
Yes.
Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell have been the dominant figures in your party for several years now, and they've spearheaded this election campaign. Is it time for them to go?
Yes.
Jeremy Corbyn's leadership is over. It is not at issue whether he's gone, it's only an issue exactly when he's gone.
If you look at what the exit poll is predicting for Scotland as a whole, could that mean that the SNP win the Lib Dem leader's seat?
Scottish National Party, 23,775.
Scotland and the rest of the UK are moving in totally different directions.
Boris Johnson may well end up with a thumping majority, but he might be taking over a very divided map.
Talking of swing, Why don't we join Jeremy, who can give us a graphic illustration of what's going on with the swingometer.
It's dramatic because it's right up here above 7%.
It's not Jeremy Corbyn, it's Brexit and ignoring democracy.
This is not just a defeat for Jeremy Corbyn, this is a defeat for the politics that he represents.
Jeremy Corbyn is a far more decent, progressive and effective person than many of his cheap and tawdry critics.
When you start to think about seats like Bishop Auckland, you really do realise what's going on here.
Labour's vote is falling by twice as much in the most working class areas compared to the least working class areas.
Sinn Féin's John Finucane may have unseated the DUP's leader in Westminster, Nigel Dodds. Now, if that proves to be correct, that will be a huge blow for the DUP.
Labour Party, 22,780.
While there's been this talk throughout the evening of this red wall crumbling in the Midlands and in the north, there is this red wall here in the south as well.
We started at the beginning of the night, Hugh saying 368 seats, we're now saying 357.
I will not lead the party in any future general election campaign. I will discuss with our party to ensure there is a process now of reflection on this result and on the policies that the party will take going forward. And I will lead the party during that period.
I want to thank the people of this country for turning out to vote in a December election that we didn't want to call, but which I think has turned out to be a historic election.
President Trump has tweeted that it looks like Boris Johnson is going to win big in the UK. It's good that the White House has finally caught up with the BBC exit poll.
I declare that Amy Callaghan is elected to serve in the United Kingdom Parliament.
The party leader of the Lib Dems, Jo Swinson, has lost her seat.
For millions of people in our country, these results will bring dread and dismay, and people are looking for hope.
Nick Fletcher is duly elected as the Member of Parliament for the Don Valley constituency.
What's your plan, Caroline, from now on?
My next plan is to go and have a cup of tea, Hugh, actually.
I have a mandate to offer Scotland the choice of an alternative future.
What has he done right that you did wrong?
Well, I'm very pleased at the majority that Boris has achieved.
We've got Bolsover. How interesting that Dennis Skinner, the beast of Bolsover's seat, he leaves the Commons, and his seat was the one that got them over the line.
Let's get Brexit done. But first, my friends, let's get breakfast done too. Thank you all. Thank you all.